October 1487. A cramped print shop in Nuremberg rattles with the rhythm of iron and ink. Outside, the streets are cold and wet. Inside, a new book is being born. On its title page, in dense Latin, one idea is pressed into paper with terrifying certainty. The world is full of demons, and they are everywhere. The book will be called Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches. Its authors stitch together scraps of scripture, old stories, and the terror of their age into a single, lethal logic. Human suffering must have a hidden enemy. They give that enemy a face, a hierarchy, and a purpose. But the story did not begin here. To understand why a late medieval jurist could speak with such confidence about invisible beings, we have to go back to the deserts of early Christianity, to Jewish apocalyptic visions, to Greek philosophers, and even earlier, to the clay tablets of Mesopotamia. This is the history of demons and what it reveals about us. Long before the word demon existed, humanity already knew that something invisible could hurt them. In the river valleys of Mesopotamia, where the first cities rose from the mud, people carved their fears into clay. These weren't abstract anxieties. They were specific, named, and terrifyingly real. The Sumerians, writing in cuneiform on tablets that would survive 4,000 years, described a world teeming with hostile spirits. They called them Utuku, Ekimmu, Alu. These weren't fallen angels rebelling against a supreme deity. They were parts of a vast, crowded cosmos where countless beings, gods, spirits, ghosts, monsters, existed in an uneasy ecology. Some were helpful, many were not. All had to be managed. Consider Lamashtu. Her name appears on hundreds of amulets and incantation tablets from ancient Mesopotamia. She was depicted with a lion's head, donkey's teeth and ears, naked breasts and bird talons for feet. She stood or crouched on a donkey nursing a pig and a dog. This grotesque figure wasn't random. Every detail encoded a specific fear. Lamashtu preyed on pregnant women and newborns. She caused miscarriages, stillbirths and fever in infants. She brought disease to nursing mothers. In a world where childbirth could easily mean death for mother or child, Lamashtu wasn't a metaphor. She was the explanation. Against her, the Mesopotamians deployed Pazuzu. He was himself a demon, a king of wind demons, with a canine face, bulging eyes, a scaly body and wings. But Pazuzu protected against Lamashtu. His image appeared on the thousands of amulets worn by pregnant women. The logic was simple. Set a demon to catch a demon. The amulets often included incantations, brief formulas commanding Pazuzu to drive Lamashtu back to the mountains where she belonged. Archaeological evidence gives us glimpses of how these beliefs structured daily life. In the ruins of ancient homes, archaeologists have found clay plaques of Pazuzu placed above doorways, especially in rooms where women gave birth. These weren't decorations. They were spiritual technology, as essential to the household as water jars or grinding stones. A woman in labour, surrounded by female relatives and a midwife, would have known that image was watching over her, standing between her child and the thing that killed babies in the night. The incantation literature is vast. Series like Maklu and Shurpu contain hundreds of spells against hostile spirits and witchcraft. These texts reveal a sophisticated understanding of how the invisible forces operated. Spirits could be bound by certain materials: clay, bitumen, wax. They could be repelled by smoke, particularly from specific plants. They responded to names, especially their own names spoken with authority. They could be transferred into objects or animals and then destroyed or driven away. One tablet from the Maklu series describes a ritual performed at night. The practitioner creates clay figurines representing the witch or demon attacking them. These figurines are bound, pierced, burned, and buried while incantations are recited. The text is explicit about timing. The ritual must be performed during specific hours, Under specific celestial conditions, the words themselves have power, but only when embedded in the correct ritual matrix. The Akkadians contributed the concept of the ekemu, a vengeful ghost. These were spirits of the dead who had not received proper burial or who died violently or unjustly. They wandered the earth, causing harm to the living. The solution was necromancy and offerings. You had to feed the dead, speak to them, give them what they wanted. Ghost appeasement was a regular part of Mesopotamian religious practice. The Assyrians continued and systematized these traditions. In the library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, excavators found tablets cataloguing diseases and their spiritual causes. Headaches, seizures, fever, paralysis, each had a corresponding demonic etiology. The diagnostic texts are remarkable for their specificity. If a patient exhibits certain symptoms on certain days, the afflicting spirit is identified and the appropriate ritual response prescribed. Large protective statues called lamassu, human-headed winged bulls or lions, stood at the gates of Assyrian palaces. These colossal figures, some weighing tens of tons, served the same function as the small Pazuzu amulet. They kept hostile forces at bay. The idea that space could be protected, that certain boundaries could be made impermeable to spiritual attack, was fundamental. What's striking about Mesopotamian demonology is its practicality. These weren't philosophical abstractions about the nature of evil. They were operational theories about why bad things happen and what you could do about it. A child dies, lamashtu. A man has nightmares, an alu spirit. Crops fail, divine anger or demonic interference. For each problem, a repertoire of solutions, incantations, offerings, protective images, ritual purifications. There's no grand cosmic drama here, no war between good and evil forces. The demons aren't rebels against divine order. They're a part of the order, dangerous elements of a complex cosmos that humans must navigate. The gods themselves sometimes employ demons as instruments of punishment. The boundary between divine wrath and demonic attack is often blurry. This worldview spread across the ancient Near East. The Canaanites, Phoenicians, and other neighbouring peoples had similar spirits. Names and details varied, but the underlying logic remained consistent. The invisible world is crowded and dangerous, and humans need rituals, experts, and protective devices to survive. By the first millennium BCE, these traditions were ancient, passed down through countless generations of scribes and priests. When a Babylonian woman in 600 BC hung a Pazuzu amulet around her neck during pregnancy, she was participating in a spiritual technology that had already been refined over more than 1,000 years. The clay beneath her fingernails, the smell of smoke from protective rituals, the whispered incantations heard from childhood. These were as real and necessary as food and shelter. But this was still not the world of demons as later ages would understand them. That transformation required new ideas about divinity, morality, and cosmic structure. It required the concept of evil as rebellion, of spirits as fallen. The pieces for that revolution were slowly assembling in other parts of the ancient world. The Mediterranean world developed its own spirit beings, and they were different. In ancient Egypt, the cosmos was populated by countless entities, but they existed within a stable divine order, presided over by Ma'at, the principle of cosmic truth and balance. The spirits in the Duat, the underworld, could be terrifying. Amit, the devourer, waited at the judgment of the dead to consume hearts that failed the test. But these beings weren't demons in the later sense. They were functionaries, parts of a cosmic machine that processed souls. Egyptian magic, like Mesopotamian magic, was highly practical. The Book of the Dead and similar funerary texts contain hundreds of spells for navigating the afterlife. Some protect the deceased from hostile beings. Others give the deceased power over spirits. What's notable is the emphasis on knowledge. If you knew the secret names of the spirits, you could command them. The texts are filled with these names, strings of words that sound nonsensical to us but represented real power to the Egyptians. The Greeks approached the invisible world differently. Their word for spirit was daimon, and it originally carried no negative connotation. In Homer, a daemon is simply a divine power, often indistinguishable from the gods themselves. By the classical period, philosophers had refined the concept. Plato described daemons as intermediary beings between gods and humans, functioning as messengers and guardians. Every person, Socrates suggested, had a personal daimon, a kind of divine guardian spirit that guided their conscience and intuition. This is radically different from the Mesopotamian model. Greek daimones weren't primarily threatening. They were ambiguous, capable of harm but also of help. They existed in a morally neutral or complex space. The concept of the good daimon was common, a protective spirit attached to a personal place. Heroes after death might become demons, watching over their former communities. As Greek culture spread through Alexander's conquests and merged with Near Eastern and Egyptian traditions in the Hellenistic world, something fascinating happened. The various spirit traditions began to blend and recombine. Greek magical papyri from Egypt dating from the 2nd century BCE to the 5th century CE show this syncretism in action. These texts, written in Greek but drawing on Egyptian, Jewish, and even Persian sources, contain hundreds of spells that invoke daimones alongside gods and angels. The Greek magical papyri are extraordinary documents. They're practical manuals for people who needed supernatural help. Want to attract a lover? There's a spell for that, invoking specific daimons. Need protection from enemies? Another spell, with a different set of spirit names. Seeking prophetic dreams? A ritual that summons a daimonic messenger. The voces magicae, meaningless strings of syllables that appear in these texts, likely represent corrupted versions of names from multiple languages. The magicians who compiled these spells didn't care about doctrinal purity. They wanted techniques that worked. If an Egyptian god name seemed effective, they used it. If a Jewish angel name had power, they incorporated it. The result was a wildly hybrid system where Zeus, Osiris, and the god of Abraham might be invoked in the same breath. Curse tablets from this period reveal another side of Greek spirit work. These were thin sheets of lead inscribed with curses, folded or rolled, pierced with nails, and deposited in graves, wells, or sanctuaries. The curses invoke various powers, gods, daemons, the dead, to afflict enemies. A typical tablet might read, "I bind the mind and tongue of so-and-so that they may not speak against me." Some are shockingly specific, targeting body parts, relationships, business ventures. What's psychologically revealing is the level of detail. The person creating the curse tablet is trying to control someone else's life through spiritual means. They're experiencing powerlessness in the normal world and turning to the invisible world for leverage. The daemon is invoked in these curses are amoral tools, spirits that will do what they're asked if the ritual is performed correctly. By the late Hellenistic period, philosophical schools had developed more elaborate theories. Neoplatonists like Plotinus and Iamblichus created hierarchies of beings. At the top was the One, the ultimate source of all reality. Below that, descending levels of emanation, the nous or divine mind, the world soul, and then various classes of spiritual beings including daimons. These beings occupied different levels of reality, and humans, through theurgic practices, could communicate with them and even ascend toward the divine. This philosophical framework was elegant, but it wasn't what most people experienced. For ordinary Greeks, Romans, and Egyptians living in cosmopolitan cities like Alexandria or Antioch, the spirit world remained what it had always been, a resource and a danger. You paid respect to protective daimons. You sought help from spirit workers when sick or in trouble. You wore amulets. You performed small rituals at household shrines. The archaeological record from Roman-era Mediterranean cities is full of evidence for these practices. Amulets combining Greek, Egyptian, and Jewish symbols. Mystery religions promising communion with divine powers. Astrologers claiming to predict fate based on planetary diamonds. Oracle sites where spirits spoke through human mediums. Into this world of morally ambiguous spirits and hybrid magical practices, a new religious movement was emerging. It came from the eastern edge of the empire, from the ancient land of Israel, and it would transform daimones into something new and terrible. But first, that transformation required a revolution in Jewish thought, one that had been brewing for centuries. The Hebrew Bible, in its oldest layers, barely mentions demons at all. The spirit world is present but not central. There are references to Shearim, hairy goat demons of the wilderness. There's Azazel, a mysterious desert entity to whom a scapegoat is sent on Yom Kippur. There are occasional hints of a divine council, other beings in Yahweh's presence, but these are fragments, not a developed system. The figure that would become Satan appears in a few texts, notably the book of Job. But in Job, hey, Satan, the adversary or the accuser, is not an evil demon. He's a member of the divine council, functioning almost as a prosecuting attorney. When he suggests testing Job's faith, God agrees. There's no rebellion here, no cosmic war. Satan is doing his job. The transformation began during and after the Babylonian exile in the 6th century BCE. When the Judean elite were deported to Babylon, they encountered the sophisticated cosmologies of their captors. They also encountered Zoroastrianism, the Persian religion that featured a stark cosmic dualism. Ahura Mazda, the supreme god of goodness and truth, locked in an eternal struggle with Angra Mainyu, the principle of evil and destruction. The impact of this encounter on Jewish thought cannot be overstated. Before the exile, Yahweh was understood as the source of everything, both good and evil. The prophet Isaiah has God say, "I form light and create darkness, I make weal and create woe." There's no cosmic enemy. By the post-exilic period, this was changing. Evil needed an explanation that didn't implicate God directly. The Book of Chronicles, written after the exile, retells stories from Samuel and Kings. In one notable change, where 2 Samuel says the anger of Yahweh incited David to take a census, 1 Chronicles says Satan did it. The same event, but the source of temptation has shifted from God to an adversarial being. Satan is becoming personified, becoming an entity with agency and malign intent. The real revolution happened in apocalyptic literature of the Second Temple period. These texts, written between roughly 300 BCE and 100 CE, reimagined the cosmos as a battlefield. The Book of Enoch, preserved in its entirety only in Ethiopic but known in fragments from Hebrew and Aramaic, tells a story that would reshape Western demonology. The key narrative appears in the first section, the Book of the Watchers. It dramatically expands a cryptic passage from Genesis to 6 about the sons of God taking human wives. In Enoch's version, these are angels, specifically 200 angels led by figures named Semiazar and Azazel. They descend to Mount Hermon. They swear an oath binding themselves together. Then they take human women as wives. The consequences are catastrophic. The offspring of these unions are giants, the Nephilim. These giants are violent, consuming everything, eventually turning to cannibalism. The fallen angels teach humanity forbidden knowledge, weapons of war, cosmetics and ornamentation, astrology, the cutting of roots and plants for magic. Azazel specifically teaches men how to make swords and shields. The world descends into chaos and bloodshed. God responds by sending angels to intervene. The giants are set against each other in mutual destruction. The fallen angels are bound. Raphael binds Azazel hand and foot and casts him into a desert chasm, piling jagged rocks on top of him. There he awaits final judgment. Semyazer and the other leaders are imprisoned in dark valleys of the earth. They can watch their children destroy each other, but they cannot act. But there's a final twist. The spirits of the slain giants don't simply disappear. Because they're hybrid beings, born from the union of heavenly and earthly, their spirits become something new, demons. These are the entities that now roam the earth, afflicting humanity, spreading violence and impurity. This is the origin of demons in Jewish apocalyptic thought. They're the ghosts of the Nephilim. The theological implications are profound. Evil is no longer something that simply exists or that God creates. It has an origin story. It results from a primordial rebellion, a violation of cosmic boundaries. Angels, created good and given free will, chose to betray their nature. Their punishment is imprisonment, but the damage they cause continues through their demonic offspring. The Book of Jubilees, another Second Temple text, develops this further. It adds that Mastema, a chief of demons, has successfully petitions God to allow 1/10 of the demons to remain active to test humanity. The rest are bound. This explains why demons continue to exist. God permits them for his own purposes. At Qumran, the community that produced the Dead Sea Scrolls, demonology became even more elaborate. The War Scroll describes a final cosmic battle between the Sons of Light and the Sons of Darkness, led by Belial. The community rule discusses the two spirits that struggle within each human heart, the spirit of truth and the spirit of deceit. Every person is a microcosm of the cosmic war. The Damascus document mentions watchers and holy ones, referring to the angelic hierarchy. It also speaks of Belial's nets, traps by which the demonic prince ensnares the unwary. These texts reveal a community obsessed with purity, constantly on guard against demonic defilement. Ritual washings, strict separation from outsiders, elaborate rules governing every aspect of life. All of this served to maintain boundaries against spiritual contamination. This worldview was not universal in Second Temple Judaism. The Sadducees, the priestly aristocracy, rejected it. They didn't believe in angels or demons. The Pharisees, the scholarly movement from which rabbinic Judaism would emerge, accepted angels and demons but remained focused on Torah observance rather than apocalyptic speculation. But for many Jews, especially in times of crisis and persecution, the apocalyptic vision made sense. It explained why the world was so filled with suffering. It promised that evil would be defeated. It gave cosmic significance to human struggles. By the 1st century CE, when a young Jewish preacher began his ministry in Galilee, demons were a familiar presence in the religious imagination. They weren't metaphors, they were real entities that caused illness, possessed people and led nations astray. Any movement claiming divine authority would have to demonstrate power over them. The battle was not just political or social, it was spiritual, waged against invisible enemies who had been preparing for millennia. Roman Judea in the 1st century was a society under immense strain. Foreign occupation, economic exploitation, cultural conflict between Hellenization and Jewish tradition, factionalism among competing religious movements. These pressures created a world in which people regularly experienced profound distress. And where there is distress, explanations are needed. The Gospels, whatever their theological significance, provide a window into how possession and exorcism functioned in this world. The writers treat demons as unremarkable facts of life. They don't need to explain what demons are or persuade readers they exist. Everyone already knows. The Gospel of Mark, the earliest Gospel, mentions demons more frequently than the others. In Mark's first chapter, Jesus enters a synagogue in Capernaum. A man with an unclean spirit cries out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Jesus rebukes the spirit, commanding it to be sent and come out. The man convulses and screams, and the spirit leaves. Several elements here deserve attention. First, the demon recognizes Jesus' identity immediately. Demons possess supernatural knowledge. They know things hidden from humans. Second, the demon speaks through the possessed person, using the body as an instrument. The man's voice, but not his words. Third, the demon fears destruction. It understands that Jesus has power over it. Fourth, the exorcism happens publicly in a synagogue before witnesses. This isn't private magic, it's a public demonstration of authority. The story of the Gerasene demoniac in Mark 5 is even more dramatic. Jesus crosses the Sea of Galilee and encounters a man living among the tombs. This man is described in harrowing detail. He lives naked among graves. He cries out day and night. He cuts himself with stones. The community has tried to restrain him with chains and shackles, but he breaks them. He's beyond social control, exiled to the boundary land between the living and the dead. When Jesus approaches, the man runs and falls before him, but it's the demon speaking. "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." Jesus asks, "What is your name?" The demon replies, "My name is Legion, for we are many." The name Legion is saturated with meaning. A Roman legion was approximately 5,000 soldiers. This isn't one demon, but thousands. Some scholars have noted the political resonance. Rome's military occupation of Judea was maintained by legions. The man's possession becomes a symbol of colonial violence internalized. Others have pointed out that legion also evokes the overwhelming nature of the man's suffering. Whatever torments him is vast and multiplied. The demons beg Jesus not to send them out of the region. Instead, they ask to be sent into a herd of pigs feeding nearby. Jesus permits it. The demons enter the pigs, and the entire herd, about 2,000 animals, rushes down a steep bank into the sea and drowns. The economic destruction is massive. The locals, when they arrive, find the formerly possessed man is sitting clothed and in his right mind. Their response isn't joy. They beg Jesus to leave. This story has been analysed from every angle. What medical condition might the man have had? What social dynamics led to his exile? What does it mean that the demons enter unclean animals and destroy them? Why do the locals react with fear rather than celebration? Each question opens into complex historical and anthropological territory. But in the narrative logic of the text, the point is simple. Jesus has authority over demons, even a massive demonic force. The man is restored not just to sanity, but to community, clothed, calm, capable of sitting among others. The demons are expelled not through elaborate ritual, but through a direct command. The power differential is absolute. Throughout the Gospels, demons speak. They announce Jesus' identity. They negotiate, they beg, they convulse the bodies they inhabit. They cause muteness, deafness, seizures, and self-harm. The Gospel writers distinguish between ordinary illness and demonic affliction, though the boundary is sometimes unclear. Jesus heals the sick and casts out demons, but these are described as different kinds of action. The disciples are given authority to cast out demons. This becomes part of their commission. When they return from a mission and report that even demons submitted to them in Jesus' name, Jesus responds with an enigmatic saying, "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven." The cosmic and the immediate blur together. Exorcism isn't just helping individuals, it's participating in the defeat of cosmic evil. After Jesus' death and resurrection, the early Christian movement continued to emphasize power over demons. The Book of Acts records several exorcisms. Paul cast a spirit of divination out of a slave girl, destroying her owner's income and landing himself in prison. The 7 sons of Sceva, Jewish exorcists, try to use Jesus' name as a magical formula without actually following Jesus. The demon replies, "Jesus I know, and Paul I recognize, but who are you?" And the possessed man attacks them violently. These stories circulated in communities that needed to know what gives authority over demons, not just the right words, not formulae memorized and repeated. The power comes from being connected to Jesus, recognized by the spiritual realm as legitimate representatives. The boundary between effective ritual and empty performance is the reality of the relationship. In the social world of early Christianity, this mattered immensely. Communities were small, often marginal, persecuted. When someone fell ill or began behaving erratically, the question was immediate: is this demons? The ability to discern spirits and cast out demons became a valued gift. Paul lists it among the spiritual gifts in 1 Corinthians. Early Christian texts like the Didache warn about testing prophets and exorcists to ensure they're genuine. The implicit theology in these practices is striking. The cosmos is a battlefield. Invisible forces are real and active. Humans are caught in conflicts not of their making. But divine power can intervene, and those aligned with that power can channel it. The kingdom of God that Jesus proclaimed is not just future hope, it's breaking into the present through concrete acts of liberation from demonic bondage. This worldview, formed in the crucible of Roman Judea, would soon encounter the broader Mediterranean world. What happened when Jewish apocalyptic demonology met Greek philosophy? When exorcism narratives circulated in cities where educated readers knew Plato? The transformation of demons into a coherent theological system, one that could withstand philosophical scrutiny and become part of Christian orthodoxy, required new intellectual work. The Church Fathers would provide it. The 2nd and 3rd centuries CE were crucial for Christian demonology. As the movement expanded beyond its Jewish roots into the Greco-Roman world, it needed to articulate its beliefs in terms that educated converts and critics could understand. These stories of Jesus casting out demons were part of Scripture. But what were demons exactly? How did they relate to the pagan gods? What were their powers and limitations? These questions demanded systematic answers. Justin Martyr, writing in the mid-2nd century, was among the first to offer a coherent theory. Justin was a philosopher before his conversion, trained in Platonism. He knew how to argue. In his first Apology and Dialogue with Trypho, he addresses the relationship between demons and pagan religion directly. The gods worshipped by Greeks and Romans, Justin argues, are actually demons. They're fallen angels who, after being cast down, set themselves up as objects of worship. The myths and rituals of paganism are demonic deception. This move was strategically brilliant. It didn't deny the reality of pagan religious experiences. People really did encounter powers in their temples and mysteries, but those powers weren't divine, they were demonic. The statues didn't represent true gods, but demons masquerading as gods. Sacrifices to Zeus or Apollo were actually feeding demons. By becoming Christian, you weren't abandoning real experiences for empty faith. You were seeing those experiences clearly for the first time and rejecting the deception. Justin's argument rested on the Enochic tradition. The fallen angels took human wives, produced evil offspring, and those offspring became demons afflicting humanity. The demons know they face eventual judgment, so they work to accumulate worshippers before the end. Every pagan temple is a demon stronghold. Every sacrifice strengthens the demonic hold on humanity. Origen, writing in the 3rd century, developed the most sophisticated early Christian demonology. Origen was a biblical scholar and philosopher of immense learning. He knew Hebrew, studied with Jewish teachers, and was deeply versed in Platonic philosophy. His treatise against Celsus responds to a pagan intellectual who mocked Christianity. In defending his faith, Origen articulated a complex theory of spiritual beings. Origen affirmed the standard narrative. Angels fell through pride and free choice, but he nuanced it. Perhaps, Origen suggested, the fall wasn't instantaneous. Perhaps some angels fell further than others. This would explain the hierarchy among demons, different ranks corresponding to different degrees of moral collapse. Origen also explored the idea that demons might not be irredeemable. If they fell through free choice, might they not, through unimaginable eons of punishment, eventually repent? This speculation was controversial and later condemned, but it reveals Origen's philosophical commitment. If God is perfectly good and rational, everything in the cosmos must ultimately serve the divine purposes, even demons. More practically, Origen explained how demons operate. They don't have physical bodies, but they have subtle pneumatic bodies, composed of a refined substance between matter and pure spirit. This allows them to interact with the material world in limited ways. They can influence thoughts, provoke emotions, create illusions, and, in cases of possession, directly manipulate human bodies. But they cannot force the will. Humans always retain the capacity to resist. This is crucial for Origen's moral theology. If demons could override free will, humans wouldn't be responsible for their sins. But demons work through suggestion, temptation, exploitation of existing weaknesses. They amplify our worst tendencies. They place thoughts in our minds. They create circumstances that make sin more attractive. But the final choice is always ours. Tertullian, writing in Latin from North Africa, took a more aggressive stance. Tertullian was a rigorous, suspicious of philosophy, contemptuous of pagan culture. His apology contains vivid descriptions of exorcisms performed by Christians. Demons, when commanded in the name of Christ, are forced to confess their identity. They admit they're fallen angels. They admit they'll face judgment. They flee in terror from Christian exorcists. Tertullian saw demons everywhere in pagan culture, not just in temples but in the theatre, the games, public festivals, even at certain professions. Christians, he argued, should avoid all this. Participation in pagan culture meant participation in demon worship. This separatist stance created tensions. How could Christians function in Roman society if they rejected its entire cultural apparatus? Tertullian's answer was stark. They should be willing to die rather than compromise. The 4th century brought a dramatic shift. Constantine's conversion and the subsequent Christianization of the Roman Empire meant demons could no longer be blamed on pagan society. Christianity was now the establishment. The empire was officially Christian. So why did demons still cause problems? Augustine of Hippo, the most influential theologian in Western Christianity, provided answers that would shape doctrine for more than a millennium. Augustine's City of God, written after the Visigoths sacked Rome in 410 CE, is a massive work of theology, philosophy, and history. Book after book addresses the nature and activity of demons. Augustine synthesizes earlier traditions into a comprehensive system. Demons are fallen angels. Their fall resulted from pride, specifically refusal to submit to God's order. They retain their angelic intellect but have corrupted wills. They know scripture better than any human. They can predict certain future events based on their vast knowledge and superhuman perception. They can manipulate matter in ways that appear miraculous but are actually natural just beyond current human understanding. Augustine is clear about demonic limitations. Demons cannot read minds. They can observe behavior closely, detect subtle physical cues, and make highly accurate inferences, but they cannot access thoughts directly. Only God can do that. Demons cannot create matter. They cannot perform genuine miracles. They can only exploit natural processes in spectacular ways. They cannot force anyone to sin. They tempt, suggest, create opportunities, but the human will remains free. Why does God permit demons to remain active? Augustine offers several reasons. First, demons serve divine justice by tormenting the wicked. They're unwitting instruments of punishment. Second, demonic temptation tests and strengthens the faithful. Spiritual struggle purifies. Third, the contrast between demons and angels, evil and good, clarifies moral reality. We understand virtue better by witnessing vice. Finally, even demonic activity ultimately serves the divine plan in ways beyond human comprehension. Augustine's demonology is psychologically astute. He describes how demons exploit human weaknesses. They study us, learn our patterns, identify our vulnerabilities. They time their attacks for moments of weakness, when we're tired, angry, lustful, proud. They frame temptations to seem harmless or even good. They work slowly, incrementally, making each step seem small until we've travelled a great distance from virtue. The Desert Fathers, Christian monks who retreated to the Egyptian and Syrian deserts in the 4th and 5th centuries, provided a laboratory for Augustine's theories. The Life of Anthony, written by Athanasius, became one of the most influential Christian texts ever composed. It describes the spiritual warfare experienced by Anthony, the founder of Christian monasticism during decades in the desert. Anthony's battles with demons are vividly physical. Demons appear as wild beasts, lions, bears, leopards, serpents, attacking him in the night. They manifest as women trying to seduce him. They appear as friends or fellow monks, engaging him in conversation that gradually becomes heretical or discouraging. They strike him physically, leaving him bruised and bleeding. They fill his cell with such a stench that others can smell it from outside. They create illusions of gold lying in his path, of demons larger than the cell itself. But Anthony develops counter-tactics. Prayer and fasting weaken demonic influence. Memorized scripture drives them away. The sign of the cross creates a barrier. Invoking Christ's name forces them to flee. Most importantly, Anthony learns not to fear them. Fear gives demons power. Contempt weakens them. When Anthony laughs at their threats, they become powerless. The Life of Anthony established a template. Subsequent monastic literature is filled with demonic encounters. The sayings of the Desert Fathers, collections of wisdom from early monks, includes countless brief stories of spiritual combat. A monk is tempted to abandon his vocation. Another struggles with pride. A third battles lustful thoughts. In each case, demons are identified as the source, and prayer or a word from a wiser elder provides the solution. These aren't metaphors for psychological struggles, though modern readers often interpret them that way. The monks understood demons as literal entities, but their descriptions reveal sophisticated psychological insight. They recognize that temptation often comes clothed as spiritual good, that discouragement is a primary demonic tactic, that pride is the subtlest and most dangerous vice, that patterns of thought can create vulnerability. The vocabulary was theological, but the observations remain acute. By the end of late antiquity, Christian demonology had achieved systematic form. Demons were fallen angels with angelic intellect and corrupted will. They inhabited an airy region between earth and heaven. They possessed limited power over matter and significant power over human psychology. They served divine purposes despite their rebellion. They would face final judgment at history's end. Individual Christians could resist them through prayer, scripture, sacraments, and virtue. The institutional church, through exorcism and baptism, could expel them. This system answered the ancient question, why do bad things happen? But it created new questions. If demons are organized and purposeful, what is their hierarchy? Who leads them? How many are there? What are their specific functions? The Middle Ages would obsess over these questions, building elaborate taxonomies of hell that still shape imagination today. The idea that demons are fallen angels was now orthodox Christian teaching, but the details remained vague. When did they fall? Why? How many fell? What happened to them afterward? Medieval theologians with characteristic thoroughness set out to answer every question. The result was a fully articulated mythology of cosmic rebellion. The biblical basis was thin. Isaiah Kent contains a taunt against the king of Babylon. How you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn. Christian interpreters read this not as political satire, but as a description of Satan's fall. Ezekiel 28 contains a lament for the king of Tyre. You are the signet of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You are in Eden, the garden of God. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created, until iniquity was found in you. Again, interpreters saw behind the earthly king a cosmic figure, the anointed cherub cast down for pride. The book of Revelation provided more material. Chapter 12 describes a war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. A third of the stars are swept from heaven by the dragon's tail, interpreted as a third of the angels falling with Satan. Early medieval theologians wove these fragments into a narrative. Before creation, God created angels in vast numbers. They were organized into hierarchies, 9 choirs in the standard scheme derived from Pseudo-Dionysius, seraphim, cherubim, thrones, dominions, virtues, powers, principalities, archangels, and angels. Lucifer, whose name means light-bearer, was among the highest angels, possibly the highest. He was created perfect in beauty, wisdom, and power. The precise moment and cause of Lucifer's fall were debated. One tradition held that it happened before the creation of humanity. God revealed his plan to create humans and to incarnate himself as one of them. Lucifer, appalled at the idea of divine condescension, refused to worship God made flesh. His pride couldn't accept that humans, material, finite creatures, would be exalted above angels. So he rebelled, saying the famous words attributed to him, non serviam, I will not serve. Another tradition placed the fall after human creation. When God commanded angels to serve humanity, Lucifer refused. Why should spirits serve flesh? This interpretation emphasizes the insult to angelic dignity. It suggests a kind of cosmic racism, angels considering themselves inherently superior to the material creation. A third tradition focused on envy. Lucifer saw God's love for humanity and couldn't bear it. He wanted that love for himself. Unable to accept sharing divine favor, he chose rebellion. Whatever the precise trigger, the result was war. Lucifer persuaded a significant number of angels to join him. The figure of 1/3 comes from Revelation, though some writers suggested more or fewer. These fallen angels divided into factions. Some followed Lucifer out of genuine conviction. Others were deceived. Others were cowardly, joining what they thought would be the winning side. The motivations varied, and this variation would later explain the different ranks and types of demons. Michael the Archangel led the loyal angels. The war itself is rarely described in detail. How do spirits fight? Medieval theologians suggested intellectual combat, a battle of wills, a contest of arguments about the justice of rebellion. Some imagined it as instantaneous, a single moment of choice that divided the angels forever. Others envisioned an extended conflict across time, though before time as humans experience it began. The outcome was never in doubt. infinite divine power cannot be defeated by created beings, no matter how powerful. Lucifer and his followers were cast down. The speed of the fall is often emphasized, like lightning, as Jesus said. One moment in heaven, the next in hell. But where is hell? Early traditions placed it in the underworld beneath the earth. Others located it in the airy space between earth and heaven, the realm where demons now operate. The most severe interpretation, developed by medieval scholastics, described hell as complete separation from God's presence, and the absence rather than a place. Wherever demons are, they carry hell with them because they're cut off from the source of all good, beauty, and truth. The fall transformed the angels into demons. Their beauty became ugliness. Their light became darkness. Their knowledge remained, but twisted toward evil. Their power persisted but limited and turned destructive. Most crucially, their will became fixed in rebellion. A key medieval debate concerned whether fallen angels could repent. The consensus? No. Angels, unlike humans, make eternal choices. When they chose evil, they chose it completely and irrevocably. They cannot change. They can only await judgment. This fixity of will explained demonic persistence. Demons know they cannot win the cosmic conflict. They know their final punishment is certain. So why do they continue? Because they cannot do otherwise. Their nature is now evil. They must oppose God even though they understand it's futile. It's a kind of cosmic insanity, an eternal spite. The medieval imagination gave this story visual form. Illuminated manuscripts from the period depict the fall again and again. Angels tumble from golden heavens, their beautiful wings turning bat-like, their serene faces contorting into grimaces. Some artists show them transforming as they fall, starting as beautiful winged figures at the top of the page, becoming increasingly monstrous as they near the bottom, until they land as horned, scaled, grotesque demons. These images serve didactic purposes. They illustrated the consequences of pride. They warned about rebellion against legitimate authority. They showed that the external beauty could hide in a corruption. They demonstrated that choices have irrevocable consequences. The story also structured medieval cosmology. The physical universe became a moral geography. Heaven above, hell below, earth in between. Demons fell downward, both literally and morally. They were now trapped in the lower realms, unable to return to heaven. They can tempt humans, but they cannot directly enter God's presence. Until the final judgment, they operate in the middle spaces, the liminal zones where divine and demonic forces contest for human souls. This cosmology reinforced social hierarchy. Just as there's a natural order in heaven, angels, and hell, demons, there's a natural order on earth, king, nobles, clergy, commons. Rebellion against earthly hierarchy mirrors Lucifer's rebellion against divine hierarchy. This made demonology a political tool. To question authority was potentially demonic. Heresy wasn't just wrong belief, it was alignment with the forces that fell from heaven. But the story also offered profound psychological insight. Pride as the root of evil, this resonated with human experience. Most people could recognize in themselves the desire to be served rather than serve, to exalt oneself above others, to refuse submission even to legitimate authority. The fall of Lucifer became a mirror. Every human temptation echoed that primordial refusal. Every sin was participation in the original rebellion. The question of Lucifer's motivation particularly fascinated medieval thinkers. Why would a perfect being possessing everything rebel? The only answer? Freedom. Free will, the greatest gift, contained the possibility of evil. God created angels with genuine freedom, which meant they could choose wrongly. Lucifer's fall demonstrated that evil isn't a substance or a force. It's a privation, an absence, a turning away from good. Evil has no positive existence. It's only the corruption of what is good. This philosophical solution created a paradox. If God is all-knowing, he knew some angels would fall. If he's all-powerful, he could have prevented it. So why didn't he? The medieval answer: because freedom is more valuable than safety. A universe of automata programmed to love God would be meaningless. Genuine love requires the real possibility of refusal. The price of freedom is the risk of hell. The war in heaven, then, isn't just ancient mythology. It's ongoing. Every human choice continues it. Every time someone chooses good, they align with Michael. Every time someone chooses evil, they join Lucifer's rebellion. Earth is the battlefield, human souls the prize, and the outcome of the cosmic war depends on individual choices made moment by moment. This narrative gave meaning to suffering. Pain wasn't random. It resulted from living in a war zone. Demons actively work to drag humans down with them. They cannot repent themselves, so they're determined that humans should fall too. Their hatred of humanity is absolute because humans have what demons lost: the possibility of salvation. By the High Middle Ages, this story was universally known. Peasants and kings, monks and merchants, everyone understood the basic framework. Sermons repeated it, art depicted it, miracle plays enacted it. The war in heaven provided the background to every moral choice, every spiritual struggle, every moment of temptation. Demons were not abstract concepts, but enemy soldiers in an active war, and everyone had to choose a side. In a medieval village, demons were as real as rain. They weren't theological abstractions debated in universities. They were present, active, and dangerous. Every aspect of daily life intersected with the demonic realm, and people developed complex strategies to protect themselves. Agricultural life was particularly vulnerable. Crops could fail for countless reasons: drought, flood, hail, blight, pests. But these natural explanations didn't exhaust meaning. Why did the drought come this year to this village? Why did hail destroy one farmer's field but not his neighbour's? The answer might be demonic interference. Demons hated human flourishing. They would spoil harvests if they could. Protective rituals permeated the agricultural year. Fields were blessed at planting time, clergy processed through villages carrying crosses and holy water. Rogation days. The 3 days before Ascension Thursday involved walking the boundaries of the parish while praying and asking God's protection. These weren't optional customs, they were essential spiritual technology, creating barriers against demonic attack. Animal husbandry faced similar risks. A milk cow suddenly goes dry, chickens stop laying, a prized ox develops lameness. The economic impact could be devastating. People couldn't afford to lose livestock, so they hung blessed herbs in the barn. They carved crosses on stable doors. They might bury a toad or cast under the threshold as a demonic trap. They learned prayers and charms from older women who knew the old ways. Childbirth remained the most dangerous threshold. Women died in labour regularly. Infants died even more frequently. The biological causes, infection, hemorrhage, malpresentation, prematurity, weren't fully understood. But the vulnerability was clear, and demons were known to attack at this exact moment. The tradition of Lamashtu, though the name was forgotten, continued in different guise. Changelings, infants supposedly swapped by demons for human babies, explained children born with disabilities or developmental differences. The real child was taken, the demon spawn left behind. Midwives operated at the boundary between natural and supernatural. They knew herbal medicines and practical techniques. They also knew prayers, made the sign of the cross, hung protective amulets. A birthing room was fortified space. A woman in labour was especially vulnerable to demonic assault because she occupied a liminal state between life and death, bringing new life through a process that could cause death. Demons inhabited such thresholds. travel was another danger point. Roads between villages passed through forests and wild places. These spaces belonged to demons more than to humans. Travellers carried holy relics, said specific prayers, avoided travelling alone at night. Wayside crosses and shrines marked the landscape, offering moments of protection. To be caught in the wilderness at night was to be exposed to the full weight of demonic attention. Weather demons were particularly feared. Storms could destroy entire harvests. Lightning killed people and animals, burned buildings, thunder terrified. Medieval people understood that weather had physical causes, they weren't stupid. But physical causes didn't exclude spiritual dimensions. Demons might use natural phenomena for malicious purposes, so church bells were rung during storms to drive demons from the air. Blessed candles were lit. Prayers were recited to St. Barbara, patron against lightning. Illness, of course, provoked immediate questions about demonic involvement. Some illnesses were straightforward, a broken bone, a cut that became infected. Others were mysterious. Fever with no obvious cause, wasting diseases, mental disturbances, seizures, these could be demonic. The challenge was discernment. Medieval people weren't credulous. They recognized that most illness had natural causes and natural cures. But some cases defied natural explanation, and those might be demonic. The symptoms of demonic affliction were fairly standard across texts. Aversion to sacred things, holy water, consecrated bread, the name of Jesus, knowledge the person couldn't normally possess, speaking in languages never learned, unnatural strength, bodily contortions, blasphemous speech that contradicted the person's normal character. If these signs were present, exorcism might be necessary. Parish priests performed minor exorcisms. The baptismal liturgy itself included exorcism of the catechumen before baptism. Everyone was understood to be born under demonic influence until freed by Christ through the sacrament. More serious cases required specialized clergy. Bishops or their appointees performed major exorcisms using formal rites. These rituals involved prayer, scripture reading, commands delivered to the demon to depart, application of holy water and salt, the laying on of hands, and invocation of saints. Medieval exorcism records where they survive show a formulaic process. The exorcist establishes authority through his office. He addresses the demon directly, demanding its name. Names had power. To name something was to begin controlling it. The demon, compelled by divine authority channeled through the exorcist, must answer. It gives its name. The exorcist commands it to depart. Often there's negotiation. The demon bargains for time or asks where it should go. The exorcist refuses compromise and insists on immediate departure. The demon departs with physical signs. The person vomits, convulses, faints, or sometimes shows visible marks on the body as if something left through the skin. Not all exorcisms succeeded immediately. Some required multiple sessions. Some demons were stronger, more deeply embedded. The person's own faith mattered, not as sole cause, but as participation in their own healing. A person who desperately wanted freedom from demonic oppression had better chance than one ambivalent. Monastic life was saturated with demonic awareness. Monks, by withdrawing from the world, placed themselves on the front lines of spiritual combat. Their prayers and ascetic practices directly threatened demonic power. Demons therefore attacked monks with special intensity. The literature of monastic spirituality is full of these attacks. Acedia, spiritual apathy, and the noonday demon was a primary monastic temptation. In the middle of a hot afternoon, when energy flags and prayer becomes difficult, the demon of acedia strikes. The monk feels that his vocation is pointless, that he should be elsewhere, that this particular monastery is wrong and another would be better, that prayer achieves nothing, that God is absent. The solution was to persist. Don't change location. Don't abandon prayer. Don't give in to the listlessness. The demon feeds on surrender. Vainglory was another major threat. A monk prays well and begins to feel proud of his spiritual progress. Instantly, the demon of vainglory strikes, inflating ego. The monk imagines he's holier than others. He begins judging his brothers. He dwells on his own virtues. This is more dangerous than gross sin because it's subtle and uses good works as material for pride. The antidote was to remember one's absolute dependence on grace, to confess one's sins frequently, to focus on Christ rather than self. Night terrors plagued monasteries. Monks sleeping in cells heard noises, saw shadows, experienced presences. Sometimes these were dismissed as natural, wind, animals, imagination. But sometimes they were identified as demonic. Prayer drove them away. The sign of the cross banished them. Speaking the name of Jesus made them flee. But they often returned, requiring constant vigilance. Sexual temptation received enormous attention. Monks took vows of celibacy. Demons knew this and exploited it. Dreams of sexual encounters were common. Medieval theology debated whether these dreams were sinful, the consensus, not if unwilled. But demons sent these dreams to weaken resolve, to create guilt, to make monks doubt their vocation. Some monks employed extreme measures. Cold water baths, reduced food, exhausting labour to weaken bodily desire. Others focused on prayer and redirection of attention. All understood the battle as real and dangerous. Lay people had their own demonic encounters, though less intense than monks. Nightmares might be demonic. Sleep paralysis, that terrifying state where you're awake but cannot move, often accompanied by sense of presence, was identified as demonic attack. The incubus and succubus, demons that sexually assaulted sleepers, were widely believed in. Men reported waking to find a succubus female demon in their bed. Women reported incubus male demon attacks. These weren't just dreams, they were spiritual assaults. The theological problem of incubi and succubi troubled scholastic thinkers. Demons don't have bodies, so how do they perform sexual acts? Augustine proposed a solution that became standard. A demon could take the form of a succubus and collect semen from a man, then transform into an incubus and deliver that semen to a woman. The demon itself wasn't creating life, just transporting material from one person to another. This explained reported pregnancies resulting from demonic encounters without attributing procreative power to demons. The obsession with demons might seem pathological from a modern perspective, but it served important psychological and social functions. It explained the unexplainable. It provided agency in a world of overwhelming forces. If your crops failed or your child died, it wasn't meaningless. It was spiritual warfare. And warfare can be fought. Prayers, rituals, sacraments, these were weapons. The universe wasn't indifferent. It was personal. And the personal could be addressed. Moreover, the demonic framework provided language for internal struggles. When someone battled addiction to alcohol, or couldn't control anger, or struggled with persistent temptation, demonic oppression named the experience of being trapped by compulsive behaviour. Modern psychology uses different vocabulary: addiction, compulsion, trauma response. But the phenomenology is similar. Something that feels alien has power over you, and you need help to break free. The medieval church offered that help through confession, penance, spiritual direction and sacraments. It also offered community. You weren't alone in spiritual struggle. Everyone faced demons. The whole Christian community was one army fighting the same enemy. This created solidarity across social classes. King and peasant both knelt before demons and before God, but it also created tools for control. If your enemy could be labelled demonic, their position was weakened. If dissent could be framed as demonic inspiration, it could be suppressed. The theological machinery that made sense of suffering could also be weaponized. The next step in demon history involved precisely that weaponization on a scale that killed thousands. As universities developed in the 12th and 13th centuries, theology became a systematic science. The great scholastic thinkers applied rigorous philosophical methods to every aspect of Christian doctrine, including demonology. They asked questions with precision and answered with elaborate arguments. The result was a comprehensive understanding of demonic nature, unprecedented in its detail. Thomas Aquinas, writing in the mid-13th century, produced the most influential scholastic demonology. His Summa Theologiae devotes numerous questions to demons, their nature, their sin, their punishment, their knowledge, their power. Aquinas approaches each topic methodically. He states a question, he lists objections, he provides his answer with supporting arguments, he responds to the objections. The format reflects confidence that reason can illuminate even spiritual realities. On the question of demonic bodies, Aquinas follows Augustine. Demons don't have true bodies. They are pure spiritual substances, but they can assume aerial bodies for temporary purposes. These aren't real bodies, but condensed air shaped by demonic will. This explains how demons can appear visible, and even seem to interact physically with material objects without actually being material. This solution raised further questions. If demons aren't material, how do they move from place to place? Aquinas argues they move instantaneously, not through space, but into it. They exist at one location and then, without traversing the intervening distance, exist at another. This is different from how material objects move, but appropriate to spiritual beings. Can demons read minds? No. Thoughts exist in the soul, and only God can directly access the soul's interior. But demons, through vast experience and acute observation, can infer thoughts from physical cues. They notice micro-expressions, pupil dilation, breathing changes, muscle tension. They know how humans think because they've been studying humanity for thousands of years. Their predictions of human behavior appear supernatural, but result from superior knowledge of patterns. Do demons know the future? Partially. They can predict based on their knowledge of causes and their experience of patterns. They can also directly observe some spiritual realities hidden from humans, but they cannot know future free choices of humans or angels, nor can they know God's specific plans unless God reveals them. Their knowledge, while vastly superior to human knowledge, is still limited. How do demons tempt humans? They cannot force the will. Free will is inviolable even by weapons, but they can present images to the imagination, inflame passions, create circumstances that make sin more attractive, and exploit existing weaknesses. They work primarily through suggestion. A thought appears in consciousness. It seems to be your thought, but it was placed there by a demon. Most people never realize they're being influenced because the influence is so subtle. Aquinas distinguishes between temptation and obsession. Temptation is external, the demon suggests but remains outside. Obsession is when a demon gains more direct influence, though still without possessing the body. Possession is the most extreme case, where a demon actually inhabits a human body. Even in possession, Aquinas insists the person's will remains free. The demon controls the body, not the soul. The person may be forced to perform actions against their will, but they don't sin in those actions because sin requires willing consent. Why does God permit demonic activity at all? Aquinas offers several reasons. Divine providence can bring good from evil. Demonic temptation strengthens virtue, like resistance training strengthens muscles. It reveals who is genuinely committed versus merely comfortable. It serves divine justice by allowing the wicked to be tormented by the very forces they align themselves with. And ultimately, even demons, despite themselves, serve God's purposes. They're like instruments wielded by a master craftsman. Their malice becomes material for divine artistry. The question of angelic and demonic hierarchy particularly interested scholastics. They knew about Pseudo-Dionysius's 9 choirs of angels. Did fallen angels preserve their original rank structure? Most theologians thought yes, the demons were organized into hierarchies corresponding to their angelic origins. A demon who fell from the seraphim would be more powerful than one who fell from the lower angelic ranks. Building on this, medieval writers created extensive demon catalogues. These lists named individual demons, identified their ranks, and specified their particular powers or spheres of influence. The most elaborate catalogues appeared in grimoires, practical magic texts that claimed to describe how to summon and control demons. The irony is that these texts, condemned by the Church as demonic themselves, provided the most detailed demonological taxonomies. The grimoires assigned each demon specific powers. One grants knowledge of hidden treasures, another causes love or hatred, another reveals the past or future, another teaches languages or sciences, another commands legions or lesser demons. The implication is that each demon has a domain, a specialization. Hell is organized like a bureaucracy, with clear hierarchy and division of labor. This organizational model shaped how people thought about spiritual warfare. Different demons required different countermeasures. An exorcist needed to identify which demon was present in order to deploy the correct prayers and rituals. Generic exorcism might work for lesser demons, but major demons required specific approaches. This is why exorcists always demanded the demon's name. Knowing the name meant knowing the enemy, and therefore the strategy. The scholastic demonologists also debated demonic mathematics. How many demons exist? Revelation suggests 1/3 of angels fell, but how many angels were there? Some theologians calculated based on Revelation's references to 10,000 times 10,000 and thousands of angels. If literal, this suggests hundreds of millions of angels and therefore tens of millions of demons. Others argued the numbers were symbolic, meaning simply countless. More practically, how many demons can affect one person at once? Jesus cast out legion, thousands, so multiple possession is possible. Can the same demon possess multiple people simultaneously? The consensus was no. Each demon is individual and can only be in one place at once, but demons can work in coordinated fashion, attacking multiple people in concert. Can demons interact with each other? Yes. They communicate, cooperate, and maintain their hierarchical structure. They can form plans and execute them collectively. This made the demonic threat even more serious. Humans weren't facing isolated spirits, but an organized army with intelligence, strategy, and command structure. The scholastic achievement was double-edged. On one hand, it showed intellectual rigor could be applied even to demons. It demonstrated that faith and reason weren't opposed. It provided clear frameworks for understanding spiritual realities. On the other hand, it hardened demonological belief into doctrine. The more detailed and systematic the demonology became, the more real demons seemed. The careful arguments about demonic nature, powers, and limitations created confidence that this knowledge was reliable, tested, true. This confidence became dangerous when transferred from theological speculation to legal practice. If demons are real, organized, and capable of specific acts, then demonic conspiracy is possible. If demons work through human agents, then those agents can be identified, prosecuted, and punished. The intellectual architecture of scholastic demonology, combined with late medieval social anxieties, produced one of the darkest chapters in European history, the witch hunts. Something shifted in Europe during the late 14th and 15th centuries. Earlier medieval demonology had focused on individual temptation and possession, but new theories emerged suggesting something more organized. a vast conspiracy of witches in league with demons, meeting in secret, worshipping Satan, causing harm through demonic power. This wasn't just theological speculation, it became the basis for legal prosecution. The transformation had multiple causes. The Black Death, arriving in 1347, killed between 1/3 and 1/2 of Europe's population. Social structures collapsed, economic systems failed, traditional authority was questioned, people desperately sought explanations for catastrophic suffering. Climate change brought colder temperatures and failed harvests. The 100 Years' War devastated France. Popular religious movements challenged church authority. The Ottoman Empire advanced into Europe. Everything seemed to be falling apart. In this context, the idea of demonic conspiracy offered comprehensibility. The chaos wasn't random, it was planned. A vast, coordinated attack on Christian civilization was underway, and the attackers had human collaborators. Earlier canon law had taken a relatively skeptical stance toward witchcraft accusations. The Canon Episcopi, a 10th century text included in canon law collections, declared that belief in witches' flight and magical transformations was illusion, demonic deception. Those who believed such things were to be educated out of their error. Witchcraft was less about real malefice than about false belief. But by the 15th century, this skepticism eroded. Inquisitors in the Alps, dealing with folk magic and heretical movements, began developing new theories. Johannes Nieder's Formicarius, written in the 1430s, collected stories about witches and their demonic pacts. The text was influential but still somewhat restrained. The real breakthrough came in 1487 with the publication of Malleus Maleficarum, The Hammer of Witches, by Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger, Dominican inquisitors. The Malleus is a remarkable and horrifying document. It systematizes witch belief into legal doctrine. Part 1 establishes the reality of witchcraft through theological arguments. Part 2 describes the practices of witches in elaborate detail. Part 3 provides legal guidelines for prosecuting witches. The authors write with absolute confidence. They know witches exist. They know how witches operate. They know how to identify and punish them. The core theory is that witches make pacts with demons. The pact is contractual. The witch pledges service to Satan. In return, demons grant power to harm others. This power allows witches to cause impotence, destroy crops, kill livestock, summon storms, inflict disease, and murder infants. Witches gather at night in assemblies called Sabbaths, where they worship Satan through obscene rituals, feast on murdered children, fly through the air on broomsticks or animals, and engage in mass orgies. Modern scholarship has shown that much of this was projection and fantasy. The Sabbath descriptions borrow from anti-Jewish and anti-heretic propaganda. The sexual elements reflect anxieties about women's sexuality. The infanticide charges echo ancient blood libel. But at the time, these claims were treated as documented fact. The Malleus cites previous authorities, provides alleged eyewitness accounts, and constructs elaborate arguments for why every element makes theological sense. The text also explains why witches are primarily women. The authors provide overtly misogynistic reasoning. Women are more credulous, more impressionable, more carnal, more prone to anger and revenge. Their very name, femina, comes from feps minus, faith plus less. Women are structurally more susceptible to demonic influence. This argument provided theological cover for gender-based persecution. The publication of the Malleus accelerated witch trials across Europe, though regional variation remained significant. Germany saw particularly intense prosecution. So did France, Switzerland, Scotland, and parts of Italy. England had witch trials but fewer executions. Spain's Inquisition, ironically, was relatively skeptical about witchcraft. Eastern Europe developed its own patterns. The peak period was roughly 1580 to 1650, though trials continued into the 18th century. The trial process followed predictable patterns. Accusation came first, often from a neighbour. Someone's cow died, and they remembered an argument with an old woman last week. Or a child became ill after an encounter with a suspected witch. The accusation reaches authorities, an investigation begins. The suspect is arrested. Interrogation starts gently. The judges aren't monsters. Most believe they're doing necessary work. They genuinely think they're protecting society from demonic attack. They ask the suspect to confess. Often, they explain that confession will lead to mercy. Refusal to confess proves obstinacy, itself a sign of demonic influence. If the suspect doesn't confess, pressure increases. Torture becomes necessary. Canon law technically required proof of guilt before torture, but in practice accusation was often treated as sufficient grounds. The torture techniques varied. Strappado, where the victim is hoisted by the bound wrists, the rack stretching the body, squassation, dropping the victim repeatedly while bound, thumb screws, leg vices, water torture. Under torture, most people confess. They confess to whatever they're asked about. Did you make a pact with the devil? Yes. How did you meet him? The answer comes from suggestion, from things the interrogator mentioned. Did you attend the Sabbath? Yes. Who else was there? The victim names names, often people the interrogators suggested, or people the victim wants revenge against, or anyone to make the pain stop. These forced confessions become evidence in subsequent trials. The named accomplices are arrested. They're tortured. They confess and name more names. The prosecutions cascade. In some regions, the witch hunts become self-sustaining engines of terror. Anyone could be accused. Anyone could be named under torture. The only safety was in being the accuser rather than the accused. Trial records reveal the psychological dynamics. Some accused witches seem genuinely confused. They don't understand what they're being accused of. They insist they're innocent. Under torture, they eventually confess to impossible things. Others seem to internalize the accusations. After days or weeks of interrogation, some begin to believe they actually did attend Sabbaths, make pacts, cause harm through witchcraft. The human mind under extreme duress becomes suggestible. Memory becomes unreliable. The boundary between reality and forced narrative dissolves. A few trial records show resistance. Some accused witches maintain innocence despite torture. Some recant confessions once torture stops. Some directly challenge their accuser's credibility. These individuals usually die anyway. Recanting a confession is proof of continued demonic influence. The demon gives strength to resist. This proves guilt more than confession would. Execution methods varied by region. Most witches were burned. In some areas, convicted witches were strangled before burning as a mercy. In others, they burned alive. Some regions preferred hanging. A few used drowning. The executions were public, crowds gathered. Authorities used the spectacle as moral instruction. See what happens to those who serve demons. See divine justice enacted. The message: the community is purified through the elimination of demonic agents. How many died? Estimates vary. The old figure of 9 million has been thoroughly debunked. More reliable scholarship suggests 40,000, 60,000 executions across Europe over roughly 3 centuries. About 75 to 80% were women. This is still a horrifying number, though far smaller than once claimed. The psychological terror extended far beyond those executed. Millions lived under the threat of accusation. Communities fractured as neighbour accused neighbour. Some trials involved prominent public figures. The North Berwick witch trials in Scotland, 1591, accused dozens of witches of attempting to kill King James VI by raising storms. The trials of Loudon, 1634, involved the alleged possession of Ursuline nuns and led to the execution of Urbain Grandier. The Pendle witch trials in England at 12 resulted in 10 executions. Each major trial spawned pamphlets, spreading fear to other regions. The Salem witch trials, 1692 to 1693, in colonial Massachusetts demonstrate how quickly accusations could spiral. It began with 2 girls having fits. A slave woman, Tituba, was accused of witchcraft. Under questioning, she confessed to meeting the devil and provided lurid details. Panic spread. Eventually, over 200 people were accused. 19 were hanged. 1 man was pressed to death. Several died in prison. Salem is particularly well documented. We have trial transcripts, letters from participants, contemporary accounts. These records show the mechanics of mass hysteria. The afflicted girls perform dramatic fits in court, claiming to see spectres of the accused tormenting them. Spectral evidence, testimony about things seen in visions, was admitted despite lack of physical proof. Respected community members found themselves accused. Property disputes and old grudges became matters of life and death. The Salem trials ended when skepticism emerged. Some accused witches were people of such obvious good character that the charges became implausible. Ministers and judges began questioning whether spectral evidence should be trusted. If the devil can appear in anyone's shape, as he surely can, then spectral evidence proves nothing. Once this logical hole opened, the entire prosecution collapsed. Those in prison were eventually released. The colony's government apologized. Judges admitted error. But in most of Europe, the end came more gradually. The Enlightenment brought new skepticism. Intellectuals questioned whether witchcraft was real, or whether confessions extracted through torture were reliable. Legal reformers argued against torture. Medical professionals suggested natural explanations for supposed witchcraft symptoms. The last legal execution for witchcraft in Europe was 1782 in Switzerland. The witch hunts left deep scars. They demonstrated how demonological belief, when combined with legal authority, judicial torture and social panic, could produce systematic horror. The same intellectual machinery that medieval theologians built to make sense of evil became a tool for creating it. Demons might or might not exist, but the belief in demons emphatically does, and that belief has consequences written in ash and blood. The Protestant Reformation split Western Christianity and intensified demonological fervour. Both Catholics and Protestants believed in demons. Both practiced exorcism, but they accused each other of being demonic, creating a situation where demons became primary weapons in theological warfare. Martin Luther's personal experience of spiritual struggle profoundly shaped Protestant demonology. His table talk and letters contain numerous references to demonic attacks. Luther described physical encounters with the devil. In Wartburg Castle, where he translated the New Testament, Luther claimed the devil disturbed his work with noises, threw things, and appeared to him. Luther famously threw an inkwell at the devil. Whether this actually happened or is apocryphal remains debated, but the story captures Luther's sense of constant spiritual combat. Luther's theology made the devil more present, not less. He rejected Catholic sacramental protections, holy water, blessed medals, relics, as superstitious. This left Protestants more exposed. Only faith in Christ, scripture and prayer could resist demons. No ritual technology, no material protections. The believer stood alone before the devil with nothing but the word. This created intense anxiety. Catholics had tools, sacraments, saints' intercession, consecrated objects. Protestants had faith alone. What if faith wavered? What if doubt crept in? The internal struggle became paramount. And because the struggle was internal, the lines between psychological distress and demonic attack blurred. Luther described Anfechtungen, spiritual temptations and attacks, in vivid terms. The devil assaults the conscience, bringing accusations of sin and unworthiness. He raises doubts about salvation. He suggests despair. Luther's solution was to throw Scripture back at the devil. When demons accuse, respond with God's promises. When demons tempt, cite commands. The word became a weapon in the hands of believers. But Luther also portrayed the devil as operating in the world through false teachers. The Pope, Luther insisted, was the Antichrist. The Roman Church was the synagogue of Satan. Catholic sacraments weren't channels of grace but demonic deceptions. This wasn't metaphor. Luther meant it literally. The institutional church, in his view, had become demon-possessed. Catholics returned the favour. They called Luther a demon-possessed heretic. Reformers were agents of Satan leading souls to hell. Protestant churches were devil's chapels. The theological debates thus became demonological. Each side projected absolute evil onto the other. Pamphlet literature from the period is saturated with demonic imagery. Woodcuts show Luther as a seven-headed monster. Others depict the Pope as Antichrist with demons whispering in his ear. Monks and nuns are shown in grotesque orgies with demons. Reformers are drawn with devil horns. The visual propaganda made complex theological disputes simple. Us versus demonic them. This mutual demonization had practical consequences. It justified violence. If your theological opponents are literally demonic, then compromising with them means compromising with hell. Toleration becomes impossible. Conflict becomes cosmic, not merely political or doctrinal. The wars of religion that devastated Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries were fought in part because both sides believed they faced demonic enemies. Exorcism became a particular battlefield. Catholics claimed exorcism proved their divine authority. Protestants couldn't successfully exorcise because they lacked valid sacraments and apostolic succession. Catholic exorcists toured Protestant regions performing public exorcisms as apologetic demonstrations. Demons forced to testify would confirm Catholic doctrine, affirm the real presence in the Eucharist, condemn Luther. Protestants responded with skepticism. These so-called exorcisms were theatre, they argued. The possessed people were frauds trained to perform, or they were genuinely afflicted but by medical conditions, not demons. Or they were possessed, but Catholic exorcism was ineffective. The apparent cure was temporary deception by the demons themselves. Some Protestants continued exorcism using different methods. They rejected ritual formulas and relied on prayer alone. They gathered communities to pray over the afflicted. They emphasized the name of Jesus without Catholic liturgical structure. Records of successful Protestant exorcisms were circulated to counter Catholic claims. The doctrine of demonic activity evolved differently in Protestant contexts. Because Protestants rejected purgatory, the dead went immediately to heaven or hell. This closed a loophole. Catholics believed some spirits might be souls from purgatory seeking prayers. Protestants insisted any spirit claiming to be a dead person was a demon in disguise. This made all supernatural encounters more dangerous. No friendly ghosts, no helpful ancestor spirits, only demons wearing masks. This heightened the stakes of discernment. Any unusual experience might be demonic. Dreams, visions, voices, all suspect. The Protestant response was to emphasize Scripture as the sole authority. Test every spirit against the Word. If an experience contradicts Scripture, it's demonic regardless of how compelling it feels. This created a framework for dismissing religious experiences that didn't conform to Reformed theology. The witch hunts intensified in Protestant regions partly due to this worldview. With no sacramental protections and a heightened sense of demonic activity, witchcraft seemed more threatening. Protestant regions like Scotland and parts of Germany saw particularly intense prosecutions. The demonic threat felt more immediate, more personal, more overwhelming. John Calvin in Geneva emphasized demonic sovereignty under God. Nothing happens without divine permission. Therefore, demons serve divine purposes. Calvin opposed superstitious practices but believed strongly in demonic reality. He saw Satan's hand in Catholic error, in heretical movements, in any challenge to proper doctrine. His spiritual worldview was thoroughly dualistic. God's elect versus the reprobate, light versus darkness, Christ versus Satan. English Puritanism developed this into a comprehensive demonological culture. Puritan preachers saw demons everywhere. William Perkins wrote, "A discourse of the damned art of witchcraft, elaborating how demons operated." Puritan diaries record constant vigilance against demonic temptation. Puritan parents taught children to recognize and resist the devil. The religious culture was simultaneously austere and intensely supernatural. The Puritan migration to New England carried this worldview across the Atlantic. New England colonists saw America as both opportunity and wilderness. The physical wilderness meant spiritual wilderness. Native Americans were understood as devil worshippers or demon-possessed. The forest harboured demonic powers. Settlement became spiritual warfare, clearing land for Christ against Satan's domain. This context makes Salem comprehensible. The witch panic didn't come from nowhere. It emerged from a theological culture that saw demons as ubiquitous threats, that understood community cohesion in terms of spiritual purity, that viewed any deviance as potentially demonic. When adolescent girls began having fits, demonic possession was the obvious explanation, and if they were possessed, someone must have afflicted them. The witch hunt logic was culturally inevitable. The Reformation thus didn't diminish demonological belief. It changed its form and intensified its urgency. Demons moved from being dangerous but manageable through Catholic ritual technology to being omnipresent threats requiring constant personal vigilance. The theological split ensured that demon talk would dominate religious discourse for generations. Only the Enlightenment would begin to dislodge demons from their central place in Western religious imagination. The late 16th and early 17th centuries produced a series of spectacular possession cases that combined demonic belief, political intrigue, gender dynamics, and public theatre. These weren't private pastoral matters, they were public dramas that drew international attention, generated massive documentation, and revealed how thoroughly demons had been woven into the fabric of European society. The Loudun possessions of 1634 remain the most famous. Loudun was a small town in western France. An Ursuline convent housed about 17 nuns under Prioress Jeanne des Anges. Urbain Grandier was the local priest, handsome, educated, arrogant. He had enemies. He'd offended powerful people through his preaching and personality. He'd also written a satirical pamphlet against celibacy that outraged church authorities. In 1632, several nuns began experiencing strange symptoms. They convulsed, screamed blasphemies, made obscene gestures, contorted their bodies. They claimed to see demons. When exorcists arrived, the nuns named Urbain Grandier as the source of their affliction. He had, they said, sent demons to possess them through a pact with Satan. They produced details. He had thrown a bouquet of roses over the convent wall, and the flowers contained demons that entered the nuns when they smelled them. Grandier protested his innocence. He had no relationship with the convent. He hadn't thrown any flowers. The accusations were impossible. But the exorcisms became public events. Thousands came to watch. The possessed nuns performed spectacularly. They spoke in languages they shouldn't know, claimed to be Latin, though skeptics noted it was often gibberish. They displayed knowledge of hidden things. They blasphemed in the foulest terms. They made sexual advances to the exorcists. The exorcists claimed to identify several demons possessing different nuns. Asmodeus, demon of lust. Beheri, demon of blasphemy. Isacharon, demon of false doctrine. Each demon was interrogateur. They were commanded to sign documents. In one infamous incident, the demon Asmodeus was commanded to write the name Joseph on a paper. The nun in convulsions scrawled illegible marks that the exorcist declared as fulfillment. Cardinal Richelieu, France's chief minister, took an interest. The case served his political purposes. Grandier had connections to Richelieu's enemies. His execution would demonstrate church authority and eliminate a troublesome priest. A commission was appointed, heavily weighted toward conviction. Grandier was arrested, tried, tortured until he confessed, and burned at the stake in 1634. But the possessions didn't end with Grandier's death. The nuns continued their performances for years. Exorcisms became tourist attractions. Jeanne des Anges became famous. She claimed that during an exorcism, the names of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph appeared miraculously on her hand in red letters. Thousands came to see. The letters appeared, faded, reappeared. Modern scholars suggest she used dye or tattooing, but contemporaries saw miracle or deception depending on their theological position. The Loudon case generated massive documentation. Trial records, exorcism protocols, witness testimonies, pamphlets, learned treatises. Skeptics wrote exposés, believers wrote defences. The debate revealed how possession cases became referenda on broader questions. Is the supernatural real? Can demons possess multiple people? Is exorcism effective? Can women be trusted as witnesses? What's the relationship between religious authority and political power? Similar cases erupted elsewhere. The Aix-en-Provence possessions in 1611 involved nuns accusing a priest, Louis Gaufridi, of witchcraft. The nuns' symptoms included sexual displays shocking for the era. Exorcists interrogated the demons and extracted confessions implicating Gaufridi. He was burned. Again, politics mixed with demonology. Gaufridi had enemies, and the possessions provided opportunity to eliminate him. The Louvier's possessions in 1647 followed a similar pattern. Nuns in Normandy became possessed and accused their chaplain of introducing demonic practices. The exorcisms lasted years. The accused died in prison before execution. His corpse was exhumed, put on trial, and burned. Even death didn't end prosecution when demons were involved. These cases share common features. First, they involved female religious communities, convents where women lived in enclosed, intense social environments. Second, they began with symptoms that today might be diagnosed as hysteria, epilepsy, or psychological trauma, but were then interpreted as possession. Third, they became public spectacles with political dimensions. Fourth, they resulted in executions of men accused of causing the possessions through witchcraft. The gender dynamics deserve attention. The possessed nuns simultaneously occupied positions of powerlessness and power. As women in patriarchal societies, they had little agency. As religious, they were supposed to be pure, obedient, silent. Possession gave them voice. They could say outrageous things, perform shocking acts, accuse powerful men, command attention, all attributed to demons rather than to their own will. The demons spoke through them, so they bore no responsibility. This created space for expression of otherwise forbidden impulses. Sexual desire, rage, contempt for authority, all could be performed during possession. Modern psychology might interpret this as dissociation, creating alternate identities that can express what the primary identity cannot. But whether interpreted psychologically or demonologically, the possession provided these women with attention, importance, and a kind of terrible power. The exorcists were also performing. Public exorcisms demonstrated their spiritual authority. Successful exorcism proved the power of the church. These events drew crowds, generated donations, enhanced reputations. Exorcists became celebrities. Jean-Joseph Surin, who exorcised Jeanne des Anges, later claimed he himself became possessed during the process. The spiritual danger added to the drama. From the perspective of authorities, these cases served multiple purposes. They reinforced Catholic claims about sacramental power in competition with Protestantism. They demonstrated that demons were real, which validated the entire cosmological framework. They eliminated troublesome individuals through a process that seemed divinely sanctioned. They provided moral instruction to the masses who watched the exorcisms and executions. But skepticism was growing. Some physicians proposed natural explanations. Some lawyers questioned the procedures, especially the use of testimony extracted during possession states. If demons are liars, why believe anything they say? If the possessed are not in control of their own speech, how can their accusations be trusted? These logical challenges slowly accumulated. Michel de Montaigne, the great French essayist, wrote skeptically about witchcraft prosecutions. "It is setting a high price on one's opinions to burn people alive because of them," he observed. He didn't deny the possibility of demons, but questioned whether evidence for demonic activity was as clear as prosecutors claimed. Plays and books satirized the possessions. Molière's Tartuffe, though ostensibly about religious hypocrisy generally, drew on public memory of fraudulent possession cases. Gradually, the cultural consensus was shifting. Demons might be real, but specific claims about possession became harder to sustain. The last great public possession case in France was Nicole Aubry in Laon, 1566. The last major possession epidemic was in Loudun. After that, possession cases continued, but became more private, less public spectacle, more medical concern. The shift from demon to disease, from exorcism to therapy was beginning. But it would take another century for the transition to become dominant. The Enlightenment didn't immediately banish demons, but it began asking uncomfortable questions. Philosophers, physicians, and jurists developed alternative frameworks that made demons less necessary as explanations. The transition was gradual, uneven, contested, but it was inexorable. René Descartes, writing in the mid-17th century, didn't deny demons. His metaphysics allowed for spiritual substances, but his emphasis on clear and distinct ideas, on doubting everything until certainty emerged, created methodological difficulties for demonology. How do you establish clear and distinct knowledge about beings you cannot see, measure, or reliably interact with? Cartesian method didn't forbid belief in demons, but it made that belief epistemologically awkward. Baruch Spinoza went further. His ethics proposed a system where God and nature were identical. Everything that happens through natural causes that are expressions of divine necessity. There's no space in Spinoza's system for demons as separate entities with their own agency. If demons exist at all, they're part of the one infinite substance, nature, and their actions are determined by natural law like everything else. This effectively naturalizes and neutralizes demons. John Locke's empiricism emphasized that knowledge comes from experience. Ideas about demons, then, would have to come from experience of demons. But experience is unreliable. People hallucinate, misinterpret, deceive, and are deceived. Unless you have direct, unambiguous experience of a demon, belief in demons rests on testimony, and testimony is notoriously unreliable. Locke's epistemology didn't disprove demons, but it undermined confidence in demon claims. Voltaire, the Enlightenment's most famous controversialist, mocked demon belief mercilessly. His philosophical dictionary contained scathing entries on possession, demons, and hell. He recounts possession cases and trial records to show how absurd they were. He doesn't claim demons are impossible. He's too philosophically cautious for that. But he makes belief in them seem ridiculous, the superstition of ignorant ages. But the real threat to demonology came from medicine. Physicians were developing natural explanations for conditions previously attributed to demons. Epilepsy, long seen as potential demonic possession, was being understood as a brain disorder. Case studies showed that epileptic patients could be treated with certain regimens, rest, diet, medications, without any exorcism. Hysteria, the diagnosis applied to many women previously considered possessed, was medicalized. Physicians debated its causes. Some thought it originated in the uterus. The word comes from the Greek for womb. Others proposed nervous disorders. The specifics were often wrong, but the framework shifted. These were medical conditions requiring medical treatment, not demonic affliction, requiring religious intervention. Mental illness generally began to be reconceptualized. Philippe Pinel in France and William Tuke in England pioneered more humane treatment of the mentally ill in the late 18th century. They argued that many people confined in asylums or chains were suffering from treatable illnesses, not demonic possession. They removed chains, created therapeutic environments, and recorded improvements. This empirical evidence supported natural explanations over demonic ones. The legal system began rejecting witchcraft prosecutions. Christian Thomasius, a German jurist, published a treatise in 1701, arguing that witchcraft accusations were based on impossible claims and should not be prosecuted. Friedrich Spee, a Jesuit priest, had earlier written Cautio Criminalis, 1631, exposing the injustices of witch trials. These legal reformers pointed out that torture produced unreliable confessions, that the evidence was always circumstantial, that innocent people were being killed. Torture itself came under attack. Cesare Beccaria's On Crimes and Punishments, 1764, argued forcefully against judicial torture. Torture, he pointed out, simply makes people confess to whatever makes the pain stop. It doesn't reveal truth. If your legal system depends on torture, your legal system is invalid. This struck at the heart of witchcraft prosecution, which relied on tortured confessions. The last witch trial executions in Europe occurred in the late 18th century, 1782 in Switzerland, as mentioned earlier, 1793 in Poland. These were anomalies by then. Most jurisdictions had abandoned witchcraft prosecutions decades earlier. Courts simply refused to hear such cases or found defendants not guilty despite local pressure. But this doesn't mean belief in demons vanished. It means institutions stopped acting on that belief. Among peasants and in rural areas, demon belief persisted. Folk magic and protective rituals continued. Priests still performed exorcisms, though more quietly. The difference was that the legal and medical establishments no longer validated those beliefs through official action. Theological resistance to naturalization was strong. Clergy argued that abandoning belief in demons meant abandoning biblical authority. Scripture clearly teaches about demons. Jesus cast them out. Paul warned against them. If demons aren't real, vast portions of Scripture become meaningless. This created real tension within Christian churches. Some theologians attempted middle positions. Perhaps demons exist but rarely intervene in the present age. Perhaps most cases attributed to demons were indeed natural, but some genuine possessions still occurred. Perhaps demons work more subtly than earlier ages thought, through temptation rather than overt possession. These compromises tried to preserve biblical authority while accommodating new knowledge. The debate over the Cock Lane ghost in London, 1862, illustrates the transition. Strange knocking. Sounds were heard in a house attributed to a ghost. Thousands came to witness. Investigations followed. Some claimed supernatural agency. Others, including Samuel Johnson, investigated and concluded it was fraud. A young girl making noises. The case became famous because it showed skepticism winning in public opinion. Supernatural explanations required more proof than they once did. Animal magnetism, proposed by Franz Mesmer, generated fierce debate. Mesmer claimed to cure diseases through manipulation of magnetic fluid flowing through bodies. Demons weren't involved, Mesmer's framework was entirely naturalistic, though his magnetic fluid was invisible and undetectable. Critics noted that his cures worked through suggestion. What Mesmer demonstrated was that dramatic cures could be achieved without reference to spirits, demons, or conventional medicine, just through the power of belief and theatrical manipulation. The phenomenon Mesmer exploited would later be called hypnosis. It showed that altered states of consciousness could be induced naturally. This undercut possession claims. If a person could be put into trance states, could speak in different voices, could appear to have different personalities, all through natural techniques, then similar phenomena during alleged possessions might also be natural rather than demonic. The philosophes didn't destroy belief in demons, but they created a cultural atmosphere where such belief seemed backward, rustic, superstitious. To be modern, educated, sophisticated meant embracing natural explanations. Demons became markers of ignorance. This class dimension is important. Elite, educated Europeans increasingly rejected demonology while rural peasants maintained it. Belief in demons began to correlate with social position and education level. The Enlightenment's legacy was ambiguous. It didn't prove demons don't exist, you can't prove a negative about invisible beings, but it made demons unnecessary for explanation. Everything previously attributed to demons could be explained through nature, psychology, fraud, or delusion. And by Occam's razor, if you don't need demons to explain phenomena, why postulate them? Yet the demons didn't quite die. They retreated, changed form, found new homes. The 19th century would see demons reborn in the language of psychology. The unconscious, that dark realm beneath consciousness where strange forces operate, would become a new habitation for the ancient shadows. The 19th century transformed demons from external spirits into internal psychological forces. This wasn't a simple replacement. Psychology didn't just rename demons. It reconceptualized what the demon concept had been trying to name, the experience of being controlled by forces within yourself that feel alien, destructive, overwhelming. Jean-Martin Charcot at the Salpêtrière Hospital in Paris studied hysteria in the 1870s and 1880s. His work with hysterical patients, most of them poor women, produced elaborate taxonomies of symptoms, convulsions, paralysis, sensory disturbances, altered states of consciousness. Charcot demonstrated these symptoms in public lectures, using hypnosis to induce and remove symptoms at will. His patients became performers in medical theatre that eerily echoed the public exorcisms of earlier centuries. Charcot's star patient, known to history as Augustine, was photographed in various states of hysterical convulsion. The images are disturbing. Her body contorts. Her face shows extremes of emotion. Looking at these photographs alongside medieval depictions of possessed demoniacs reveals striking similarities. The same convulsions, the same contorted postures, the same sense of a person overtaken by forces beyond their control. But Charcot's explanation was neural, not demonic. Hysteria resulted from functional disturbances in the nervous system. The symptoms were real, not feigned, but they were produced by the patient's own nervous system, not by invading spirits. Treatment involved hypnosis, suggestion, sometimes rest cures, or electrotherapy. The demons had been relocated from outside to inside, from spirits to neurons. Sigmund Freud, who studied briefly with Charcot, took the internalization further. His early work on hysteria, particularly the case studies in Studies on Hysteria, 1895, proposed that symptoms resulted from repressed traumatic memories. Something unbearable had happened, usually in childhood. The mind buried it, but the memory persisted in the unconscious, generating symptoms. The symptom was a compromise formation, a way of expressing and simultaneously hiding the repressed material. Freud's therapeutic technique, psychoanalysis, involved bringing the repressed material into consciousness. Through dream interpretation, free association, and analysis of slips and errors, the hidden memories could be recovered. Once conscious and processed, the symptoms would disappear. The demon was the repressed memory itself, and the exorcism was called making the unconscious conscious. The parallels to demonological thinking are profound. Traditional exorcism involved identifying the demon, compelling it to reveal its name, and commanding it to leave. Psychoanalysis involved identifying the repressed complex, compelling it to surface through interpretation, and integrating it into conscious awareness so it loses its power. Same structure, different metaphysics. Freud's case histories read remarkably like possession narratives. Anna O. developed multiple symptoms: paralysis, visual disturbances, language problems, 2 distinct personality states. She would fall into altered states where she lived in the past, experiencing events from exactly 1 year earlier. Freud's colleague Josef Breuer treated her by having her talk about traumatic memories while hypnotized. The symptoms lifted. Breuer and Freud called this the talking cure. The case of Dora involved an 18-year-old with cough, depression, and suicidal ideation. Freud traced these symptoms to repressed sexual trauma and conflicted desires. The rat man was tormented by intrusive, horrifying thoughts about rats, specifically imagining a torture where rats eat through a person's anus. Freud interpreted this as expressing repressed homosexual desire and hostility toward the father. The wolfman experienced severe anxiety stemming from an early childhood dream of wolves sitting in a tree. In each case, Freud identifies an alien presence within the psyche, a repressed complex that has autonomous power. The complex operates according to its own logic, causes symptoms against the patient's conscious will, and must be confronted to be neutralized. This is psychological demonology, secularized and medicalized but structurally similar. Carl Jung, initially Freud's heir apparent, developed this further. Jung's concept of the shadow, the dark, unconscious side of the personality that contains everything we reject about ourselves, is explicitly demon-like. Jung wrote that confronting the shadow feels like meeting a demon. It seems alien, evil, not self. But psychological health requires integrating the shadow, recognizing it as part of you, not an invading other. Jung was more explicitly interested in religion and mythology than Freud. He studied alchemy, Gnosticism, world religions. He noticed that demon stories appear across cultures and concluded they point to psychological universals. Demons are projections of the shadow. When we encounter unbearable parts of ourselves, we externalize them, make them into demons out there, so we don't have to recognize them in here. Jung's patients sometimes reported experiences he called confrontations with the unconscious. These could be terrifying visions, voices, overwhelming emotions, sense of disintegration. Jung distinguished between psychosis and spiritual crisis. Sometimes what looked like mental illness was actually a necessary breakdown preparing for breakthrough. The demons that appeared during these crises were real psychologically, even if not literally. The language of fighting your demons became common therapeutic discourse. Addiction was described as demon. The demon alcohol, my addiction is a demon I battle every day. Depression was demon, the black dog, the demon that won't let me go. Trauma was demon, haunted by what happened, the ghost of the past. This language isn't mere metaphor. People experiencing these conditions often describe them in exactly these terms. An alien force has taken control, something inside but not me, something that compels behavior against will and judgment. The phenomenology of addiction, for instance, perfectly matches possession. The sense that something else is making you do things you know are destructive, that you hate yourself for doing but you cannot stop. 12-step programs, particularly Alcoholics Anonymous, developed quasi-religious solutions to addiction. The framework is essentially exorcistic: admit powerlessness over the demon, alcohol, turn to a higher power, confess wrongs, make amends, help others. The meetings provide community support similar to traditional religious community. The recovered addict testifies to liberation, like someone formerly possessed testifying to exorcism. Pierre Janet, a contemporary of Freud often overshadowed by him, developed the concept of dissociation. Some traumatic experiences are so overwhelming that they cannot be integrated into normal memory and identity. They split off, forming autonomous personality fragments. These fragments can take control of behavior without the primary personality's awareness or consent. Janet was describing what earlier ages called possession. Multiple personality disorder, later renamed dissociative identity disorder, became psychiatry's closest analogue to possession. Patients present with distinct personality states, each with its own name, memories, preferences, even physical characteristics. The alters can take control without the host personality knowing. Sometimes the alters claim to be demons, spirits, or dead people. The therapeutic approach to DID is similar to exorcism in structure but different in goal. Rather than expelling the alters, the therapist tries to facilitate communication between them and eventually integrate them into a unified personality. The alters are understood as parts of the patient, not invading entities, though patients themselves often experience them as other. 20th century psychology thus didn't eliminate demons, it relocated them. The old language of demon possession provided remarkably accurate phenomenological descriptions of psychological states now understood through neuroscience and trauma theory. The treatment modalities changed, talking cure instead of holy water, but the underlying human experience remained constant, the terrifying sense of being overtaken by forces beyond your control. Religious believers pointed out that psychological reinterpretation didn't disprove literal demons. Perhaps both exist, demons and psychological complexes, and sometimes they overlap. Perhaps demons exploit psychological vulnerabilities. Perhaps what psychiatrists call mental illness is often actually spiritual attack. This debate continues in religious communities where exorcism remains practiced. But in mainstream medical and psychiatric practice, demos became unnecessary. Every phenomenon once attributed to demons could be explained and treated through psychological and neurological frameworks. The success of these treatments, imperfect but statistically significant, provided empirical validation. You don't need demons to heal people once described as possessed. Yet the demonic language persists in everyday speech. We describe depression as darkness that invades. We talk about battling our demons. We speak of being haunted by the past. These aren't scientific terms, but they capture something scientific language sometimes misses: the subjective experience of psychological suffering as invasion, possession, cosmic warfare within the self. The old language, it turns out, still works. The demons moved inside, but they didn't disappear. While Western Christians were developing and then doubting their demonology, other cultures maintained their own rich traditions of spirits, demons, and spiritual possession. These traditions continue into the present, reminding us that the Western trajectory from belief to skepticism isn't universal. Islamic demonology centers on jinn, beings created from smokeless fire before humans were created from clay. The Quran is explicit about jinn. They exist. They have free will. Some are righteous Muslims, others are rebellious Kafirs. The rebellious jinn include Iblis, Satan, who refused to bow to Adam and was cast out. Iblis and his followers now work to lead humans astray. Jinn are not purely spiritual like Christian angels. They have bodies, though made of fire rather than matter. They eat, drink, marry, reproduce, die. They live in a parallel world overlapping ours. They can see us, but we usually cannot see them unless they choose to reveal themselves. They inhabit ruins, deserts, graveyards, bathrooms, liminal spaces between human order and chaos. In Islamic tradition, not all jinn are demons, shayatin. Many are neutral or even friendly toward humans. Stories tell of righteous jinn who embraced Islam after hearing the Quran. But shayatin, demon jinn, are hostile. They whisper temptations, cause illness, possess people, mislead travellers. Protection comes through reciting Quran, especially the throne verse and the last two surahs. The phrase Bismillah, in the name of Allah, creates barriers against jinn. Possession by jinn remains a lived reality for many Muslims worldwide. The symptoms are similar to possession accounts elsewhere. Personality changes, speaking in unknown languages or voices, aversion to sacred texts, claims of supernatural knowledge, violent behavior. Treatment is ruqya, Islamic exorcism, performed by qualified practitioners. The exorcist recites Quran over the afflicted person, commands the jinn to leave in Allah's name, and applies sacred remedies like water over which Quran has been recited. Anthropologists studying contemporary Muslim communities document possession cases regularly. One ethnography describes a woman in Egypt whose family sought ruqya after she began speaking in a male voice, claiming to be a jinn who had fallen in love with her. Another describes a young man in Morocco who became violent and claimed a jinn was forcing him to attack his father. These aren't historical curiosities. They happen today in contexts where jinn belief is normative. The Islamic framework differs from Christian demonology in key ways. Jinn aren't fallen angels, they're a separate category of creation. Possession isn't always malicious. Sometimes jinn fall in love with humans and possess them out of attachment rather than hostility. The solution isn't exorcism that destroys or banishes, but negotiation and prayer that persuades the jinn to leave. Islamic scholars debate whether jinn possession is common or rare, but few deny it's possible. In South Asian religious traditions, the taxonomy of hostile spirits is vast. Hindu tradition includes rakshasas, powerful demons that appear in the Ramayana and other epics. Ravana, who abducts Sita, is a rakshasa king. These beings are intelligent, capable of magic, often grotesque in appearance. But they're not inherently evil. Some rakshasas are devout worshippers of Shiva. They're ambiguous, like Greek daimons. More commonly encountered in daily South Asian life are bhutas, pretas, and pisachas, spirits of the dead who didn't receive proper funeral rites or died violently. They linger, causing trouble for the living. A child dies. The family must perform rituals to ensure the spirit moves on rather than becoming a bhuta. A woman dies in childbirth. Her spirit might become a churel, a particularly dangerous female ghost that attacks pregnant women and infants. The parallel to Lamashtu is striking. Spirit possession, called bhuta-grasta in Sanskrit, is common in rural India. The possessed person's behaviour changes. They might prophesy, demonstrate unusual strength, speak in voices, or become ill. Treatment involves consulting a bompa or jankri, a ritual specialist who can diagnose which spirit is present and perform appropriate rituals. These rituals might involve offerings to appease the spirit, mantras to compel it, or negotiation to convince it to leave. Anthropologists have documented hundreds of possession cases in South Asia. One study in rural Karnataka found that 20% of women reported experiencing possession at some point. The possessing entities included ancestors, local deities, demons, and nature spirits. The social function became clear. Possession provided marginalized women with temporary power and attention. During possession, they could make demands, express grievances, speak truths usually forbidden. The possession state was simultaneously spiritual reality and social performance. Buddhist traditions, despite the religion's focus on enlightenment and non-self, include elaborate demonologies. Tibetan Buddhism is particularly rich. The Yidam deities appear wrathful and demon-like, but are actually protective forces. But true demons exist, marais that tempt toward ignorance, pretas or hungry ghosts trapped in tormented realms, and various malevolent spirits that inhabit mountains, lakes, and wild places. Tibetan exorcism rituals are complex multi-day affairs involving elaborate visualizations, chanting, ritual implements, and offerings. The exorcist doesn't simply command the demon to leave. Instead, they might visualize themselves as a wrathful deity with power over demons, negotiate with the entity, offer it something to convince it to depart, or use compassion to transform the demon's hostility. The framework is less dualistic than Christian demonology. Demons can potentially be converted into protectors. In East Asian traditions, Japanese Oni are perhaps the most visually iconic demons. With horns, wild hair, clawed hands, and usually red or blue skin, Oni appear throughout folklore and art. They're agents of punishment in hell, but also wild forces of nature. They represent unchecked appetite, violence, chaos. But like many Japanese supernatural beings, Oni are not absolutely evil. Stories tell of Oni who become Buddhist protectors, or who fall in love with humans and change their nature. Chinese demonology includes Gui, ghosts, and Yaoguai, demons. The boundary between these categories is fluid. A fox spirit might be neutral, malicious, or helpful depending on the story. Chinese folk religion developed elaborate systems of spirit appeasement and control. Taoist priests perform exorcisms using talismans, sacred texts, ritual gestures, and magical weapons. Taoist exorcism involves commanding spirits using the authority of celestial bureaucracy. You're essentially serving the demons with legal papers from the heavenly court. Korean shamanism, still practiced today, deals extensively with spirits. Mudang shamans perform gut rituals to communicate with spirits, including those causing illness or misfortune. The ritual might involve the Mudang becoming possessed by the problematic spirit, then negotiating in that state to resolve the issue. This is radically different from Western exorcism. The healer deliberately invites possession to understand and resolve the spirit's grievance. African traditional religions across the continent include complex spirit worlds. The Yoruba Orisha, though not demons in the Western sense, include trickster and dangerous spirits like Ishu. Possession by Orisha is central to religious practice in Yoruba tradition, and its diaspora descendants like Santeria and Candomblé. Being mounted by an Orisha during ritual is the goal, not something to be exorcised. But hostile spirits also exist in African traditions. The Zulu include beliefs about Tokoloshi, malevolent dwarf-like creatures that cause illness and misfortune. Various ethnic groups describe witches who send spirits to attack enemies. Traditional healers, Sangomas in South Africa, Nganga in Central Africa, diagnose spiritual afflictions and perform cleansing rituals. Christianity's spread to Africa, Asia, and the Americas brought Christian demonology but also encountered existing spirit traditions. The result was syncretism, blending of traditions, or conflict depending on context. In some regions, Christian missionaries denounced local spirits as demons. Traditional protective spirits became redefined as devils to be cast out. This cultural violence destroyed indigenous spiritual frameworks. But in other contexts, synthesis occurred. In Latin America, indigenous and African spirit traditions merged with Catholic demonology. The result is rich hybrid traditions where one might pray to Catholic saints while also consulting with practitioners who work with spirits the Church would call demons. Curanderismo in Mexico and the southwestern United States operates in this liminal space, using Catholic prayers alongside pre-Christian techniques. Contemporary Pentecostal and charismatic Christianity has globalized and intensified deliverance ministry. Mass exorcisms, In Nigeria, Brazil, and other regions with strong Pentecostal movements, massive revival meetings include dramatic exorcisms. Pastors command demons to leave in Jesus' name before audiences of thousands. The possessed fall, shake, vomit, scream. The theatrical elements resemble both medieval European exorcisms and traditional African possession rituals. Anthropologists studying these movements note they serve multiple functions. They provide explanation for suffering in contexts of poverty, political instability, and social disruption. They offer hope. Demonic oppression can be broken, life can change. They create community through shared spiritual experiences, and they allow expression of experiences, trauma, violence, social pressure that can't be spoken about directly. The Global South has not simply imported Western demonology. Instead, it's created new hybrid forms drawing on indigenous traditions, Christian frameworks, and contemporary social realities. A woman in a Kinshasa megachurch who manifests during deliverance ministry might understand her experience through Christian language of demons, while also holding beliefs about ancestral spirits that would be unfamiliar to American Pentecostals. What's striking across all these traditions is the persistence of possession as a human experience. Whether interpreted through Islamic jinn, Hindu bhutas, Buddhist marayas, or Christian demons, people across cultures report experiences of being overtaken by forces beyond their control. The names change, the theological frameworks differ, but the phenomenology remains consistent. This raises profound questions. Is possession a cultural construction shaped entirely by local beliefs? Or does possession point to some underlying human experience that different cultures interpret through available frameworks? Are these spirits real entities, or projections of psychological distress? Or might both be true, psychological and spiritual dimensions of a single complex reality? Western psychology tends toward reductionist explanations. Possession is dissociation, psychosis, or cultural performance. But practitioners and believers in these traditions argue that Western psychology misses something essential. The spirits are real, they insist. The possession is genuine spiritual interaction, not merely psychological disturbance. And their healing traditions work, they point out. People are healed through spiritual means that Western medicine would dismiss. The globalized world now contains all these frameworks simultaneously. A person in New York might consult a psychiatrist, a Catholic exorcist, and a Santeria practitioner about the same symptoms. They are navigating multiple explanatory frameworks, each offering different truthful claims and different solutions. Demons, in this context, become boundary objects, phenomena that different knowledge systems interpret differently, but all recognize as real in some sense. The question isn't whether demons exist in some objective sense. The question is what work the concept of demons does. It names experiences of suffering, powerlessness, invasion, and alienation. It provides frameworks for intervention and healing. It creates communities of shared belief. It explains the inexplicable. These functions are real regardless of demons' ontological status. And as long as humans experience suffering that feels demonic, overwhelming, alien, destructive, the language of demons will persist in some form. The late 20th century saw demons return to Western popular consciousness through mass media. The catalyst was The Exorcist, released in 1973, but the story begins earlier with a case that would become one of the most documented possession accounts in modern history. In 1949, in a suburb of Washington, D.C., a 13-year-old boy began experiencing strange phenomena. The family, Lutheran and middle class, initially sought natural explanations, but the events escalated. Scratching sounds in the walls, objects moving without apparent cause, the boy's bed shaking violently. They consulted their Lutheran pastor. He spent a night with the family and witnessed the bed moving. He suggested the boy might need a Catholic exorcism. the family consulted a Catholic priest, Father E. Albert Hughes. Father Hughes attempted an exorcism but stopped after the boy, displaying unusual strength, broke free from restraints and slashed the priest's arm. The family moved to St. Louis to stay with relatives. There, the phenomena continued. Scratching sounds, the boy speaking in a guttural voice, using profanity unlike his normal speech, exhibiting knowledge he shouldn't possess. More priests were consulted. A Jesuit priest, Father William Bowdern, took charge. He kept a detailed diary of the exorcism, which lasted from March to April 1949. The diary records disturbing events, the boy's body marked with scratches that formed words, including hell and exit. The boy speaking in what sounded like Latin, though he'd never studied it. Objects flying across the room, the boy demonstrating strength requiring multiple men to restrain him. Days of prayers and commands, with the demon sometimes responding through the boy's voice, taunting the priests. Finally, after weeks, the exorcism succeeded. The boy had a vision of Saint Michael defeating a demon. He spoke one word, Satan. Then his body relaxed. He was free, the demon had departed. The boy had no memory of the possession period. He grew up normal, married, lived an ordinary life, and never spoke publicly about what happened. The case remained obscure until William Peter Blatty, a writer, learned about it years later. He researched the case, spoke to some involved, and wrote a novel that fictionalized the events. The Exorcist changed significant details. The possessed person became a 12-year-old girl named Regan. The setting moved to Georgetown. The character dynamic shifted. But the core elements came from the real case. The medical tests finding nothing wrong, the escalating phenomena, the doubt and terror of those involved, the exorcism itself. The film adaptation, directed by William Friedkin, became a cultural earthquake. Released in December 1973 to terrified audiences, people fainted in theatres, vomited, walked out, sought counselling. The film grossed over $440 million and became the first horror film nominated for Best Picture. More significantly, it made demons culturally present again in a way they hadn't been for decades. The film's power came from its documentary approach. It didn't present demons as obvious evil. It showed a rational modern family dealing with something they couldn't understand. Medical doctors are consulted, psychiatrists, neurologists. Every scientific explanation is exhausted before exorcism is attempted. The mother is an atheist actress. The possessed girl is innocent. The priests are doubting modern men, not medieval zealots. The film says, this could happen to you in your world, despite everything you believe about how reality works. The special effects traumatized in 70s audiences. Regan's head spinning completely around. Her body levitating off the bed, projectile vomiting of green fluid. The crucifix scene, which remains one of cinema's most disturbing sequences. Friedkin insisted these effects be as realistic as possible. The impact was that audiences couldn't dismiss what they were seeing as fake-looking. It looked real, and that made it terrifying. The Exorcist's success prompted an immediate response in religious communities. The Catholic Church, which had largely stopped performing exorcisms, was flooded with requests. People became convinced they were possessed. Parents brought children exhibiting behavioral problems. Adults dealing with addiction, depression, or trauma sought exorcism. The Church had to clarify guidelines, train new exorcists, and deal with demand it hadn't seen in centuries. Some priests who became exorcists reported that their work increased dramatically after 1973. Father Gabriele Amorth, the Vatican's chief exorcist from 1986 until his death in 2016, claimed to have performed tens of thousands of exorcisms. He insisted that demonic activity was increasing, that Satan was attacking humanity more aggressively. Critics suggested he was simply diagnosing more cases because possession had returned to cultural consciousness through the film. The 1970s and 80s saw numerous publicised possession cases. The Amityville Horror 1974 involved a family claiming their Long Island house was demonically infested. The story became a book and film, though subsequent investigations suggested much was fabricated or exaggerated. But the public appetite for such stories was clear. Demons sold. The most tragic case was Anneliese Michel in Germany. Anneliese was born in 1952 in a devout Catholic family. At age 16, she began having seizures. Doctors diagnosed epilepsy and prescribed medication. But over the years, her condition worsened. She saw demonic faces, heard voices, became unable to walk past crucifixes or religious images. She refused to eat, claiming demons prevented her. Her family consulted priests. After lengthy consideration, church authorities authorized exorcism. 2 priests performed rites over Anneliese from 1975 to 1976. During these sessions, recorded on tape, Anneliese speaks in disturbing voices, identifying herself as various demons including Lucifer, Judas, Nero and Hitler. She barks like a dog, makes animal sounds, speaks what seems like multiple languages. She's violent, requiring restraint. The exorcisms continued for months while Anneliese deteriorated physically. She stopped eating almost entirely, believing suffering would drive out the demons. She knelt until her knees were destroyed. In July 1976, weighing only 68 pounds, Anneliese Michel died of malnutrition and dehydration. Her parents and the 2 priests were prosecuted for the negligent homicide. The trial in 1978 attracted international attention. The defense argued Anneliese was genuinely possessed and the exorcisms were necessary. The prosecution argued she suffered from epilepsy and psychosis and died because she was given religious ritual instead of medical treatment. The defendants were found guilty but received only suspended sentences. The case raised profound questions. Medical experts testified that Anneliese's symptoms, hallucinations, seizures, personality changes, were consistent with temporal lobe epilepsy and psychosis. Psychiatric treatment and a proper medication might have helped her. Yet the recordings of the exorcism sessions are deeply unsettling. The voices don't sound like someone with epilepsy, they sound like something else. Was Anneliese mentally ill? Almost certainly, by psychiatric definition. Was she also possessed? Believers say yes, possession and illness can coexist. Demons exploit vulnerabilities. Skeptics say the possession belief itself made her worse, convincing her she was beyond medical help. The truth is we can't know. What's undeniable is that belief in demons killed her, whether or not demons exist. The Catholic Church, chastened by the case, developed stricter protocols. Before authorizing exorcism, medical and psychiatric evaluation became mandatory. The person must be examined by doctors. Natural explanations must be exhausted. Signs of genuine possession must be clear. Knowledge of hidden things, speaking unlearned languages, aversion to sacred objects, strength beyond natural capacity. Even then, exorcism should accompany medical treatment, not replace it. But the guidelines are often ignored. In many parts of the world, especially where medical care is limited, possession remains a primary explanation for mental illness. Exorcism continues widely, performed by priests who may or may not follow official protocols, by Pentecostal pastors with no formal training, by traditional healers using indigenous methods. The horror film genre The Exorcist spawned continues today. The Conjuring universe, beginning in 2013, presents, based on true cases, demon possession stories drawn from the files of Ed and Lauren Warren, paranormal investigators. Each film follows a formula: normal family, strange occurrences, escalation, discovery of demonic presence, desperate exorcism. Audiences know the formula, but it still works because it taps into primal fears. These films serve a curious function. For believers, they validate that the spiritual realm is real and active. For skeptics, they're safely contained horror, exploring dark themes without actual belief. The films work on both audiences simultaneously. They've also spread Western Christian demonology globally. A teenager in Seoul, Mumbai, or Sao Paulo who watches The Conjuring absorbs Catholic demonology. Demons as fallen angels, exorcism through priestly authority, the power of the crucifix. This is cultural imperialism through entertainment. By the 2020s, exorcism had become simultaneously archaic and contemporary. The Catholic Church still maintains official exorcists in each diocese, though many are reluctant to discuss it publicly. Protestant deliverance ministries openly advertise spiritual warfare services. Pop culture produces endless demon content. Demons are simultaneously everywhere and nowhere, ubiquitous in media, rare in official acknowledgement, but still believed by millions. The question The Exorcist raised in 1973 remains unanswered. In a world of science and reason, is there still room for the demonic? The film suggested, yes, that rationalism's triumph is incomplete, that something ancient and evil still operates. Whether this is true or simply appealing fiction, it's undeniable that demons, real or imagined, continue to grip human imagination with a force that centuries of enlightenment have failed to diminish. By the late 20th century, demons had become thoroughly metaphorical in secular Western discourse, yet the metaphor retained surprising power. To say someone is fighting their demons communicates something that clinical language like managing mental health challenges does not. The demonic vocabulary captures the subjective experience of psychological struggle in ways that seem irreplaceable. Contemporary literature uses demon language constantly. In Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, addiction is described in explicitly demonic terms. The demon alcohol isn't just a figure of speech. Addicts describe feeling possessed, doing things they don't want to do, knowing behavior as destructive but unable to stop, experiencing their own will as hijacked by something alien and powerful. The first of A's 12 steps is admission of powerlessness, exactly the language medieval people used about demonic oppression. One recovered alcoholic's testimony, recorded in an AA publication, describes his drinking years. It was like something else was making the decisions. I'd swear every morning I wouldn't drink, but by evening I was pouring the first glass. It wasn't me, it was the demon. This language persists despite AA's insistence that alcoholism is a disease. The disease model and the demon model coexist because they describe different aspects of the same experience. The poet Anne Sexton, who struggled with depression and eventually died by suicide, wrote about her demons constantly. In letters and poetry, she described them as actual presences, voices that spoke to her, forces that compelled her toward death. Her therapist's notes, later published with permission, record conversations where Sexton discusses her demons in concrete terms. Was she psychotic? Deeply depressed? Using metaphor? All three might be true simultaneously. William Styron's memoir, Darkness Visible, describes his descent into depression using language that medieval readers would recognize. For myself, the pain is most closely connected to drowning or suffocation, and the horror of this malady is that no remedy is available. He describes it as an invading force, something that seized him, that possessed him. The demon language captures something about depression that purely biological language, neurotransmitter imbalance, serotonin deficiency, cannot. Trauma specialists have noted that trauma survivors often describe their symptoms in ways that sound like possession. Complex PTSD can create alter personalities that feel like separate entities. Dissociative episodes involve feeling that someone else has taken control, Flashbacks are intrusions from the past that hijack the present. The language of invasion, possession, and alien control appears spontaneously in trauma narratives. Bessel van der Kolk's influential book The Body Keeps the Score documents how trauma literally possesses the body. Traumatic memories aren't stored like normal memories. They're encoded in ways that make them erupt involuntarily, through sensations, emotional flooding, behavioural compulsions. Van der Kolk doesn't use demon language, but his patients often do. One woman describes her trauma. "It's like a demon living in my body, taking over whenever it wants." Therapeutic approaches to trauma bear striking resemblance to exorcism structures. EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, involves recalling traumatic memories while performing bilateral stimulation, eye movements or tapping. The traumatic memory is summoned, held in consciousness, and then through the therapeutics process loses its charge. Summoning, confronting, neutralizing, the structure is exorcistic even if the language isn't. Internal family systems therapy, developed by Richard Schwartz, explicitly uses the language of parts. The psyche contains multiple subpersonalities: managers, firefighters, and exiles. These parts have their own perspectives, emotions, and goals that can conflict with the core self. Therapy involves getting to know these parts, understanding their roles, and helping them transform. The framework treats internal voices and impulses as distinct entities, not unlike demons or spirits. Religious individuals in therapy sometimes ask whether their suffering is psychological or spiritual. Is this depression or demonic oppression? Is this trauma or spiritual attack? Many therapists, even secular ones, have learned not to dismiss these questions. The answer might be both. Demons, literal or metaphorical, and psychological processes can be understood as two languages describing overlapping realities. Some Christian therapists explicitly integrate spiritual warfare concepts into clinical practice. They might do psychotherapy and prayer ministry simultaneously. They assess whether symptoms have natural psychological causes, spiritual causes, or both. This integrative approach is growing in evangelical communities. Critics argue it pathologizes spiritual experience and spiritualizes pathology. Proponents argue it takes seriously the lived experience of religious people who understand their suffering in spiritual terms. Secular therapists increasingly use mindfulness and acceptance-based approaches that resemble spiritual practices. Rather than fighting anxiety or depression directly, trying to make it go away through willpower, you acknowledge it, observe it, create space around it. You learn to say, "I'm experiencing anxiety," rather than "I am anxious." This creates distance between the observing self and the disturbing experience. This is structurally similar to medieval advice about demons. Don't identify with the temptation. Recognize it as coming from outside your true self. Hold it at arm's length. Don't fight it directly, that gives it power. Instead, turn your attention to God, to your values, to your true desires. The parallel between medieval spiritual direction and contemporary acceptance and commitment therapy is striking. The language of inner demons has become so naturalized that people use it without thinking about the theological implications. A political leader might say, "He's fighting his demons" to explain erratic behavior. A sports commentator might say an athlete exorcised their demons by winning after previous failures. A business article might discuss the demons of imposter syndrome. The metaphor has escaped religious containment and roams freely through secular discourse. Some writers argue this trivializes genuine suffering. To call workplace stress your demons diminishes both the historical reality of demon belief and the seriousness of clinical conditions. Others argue the metaphor remains powerful precisely because it captures something real about human experience. We do battle forces within ourselves that feel alien, overwhelming, evil. The philosopher William James, in the varieties of religious experience, he discussed what he called the divided self. People experience internal conflicts so severe they feel like civil war within the psyche. Different aspects of the self want contradictory things. Desires we consciously reject keep asserting themselves. We can observe ourselves doing things we don't want to do. Paul's cry in Romans, "I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I keep on doing," resonates across millennia because the experience is universal. James suggested that religious conversion and psychological integration might be describing the same process. The twice-born person in religious language is someone who has moved through crisis to wholeness. In psychological language, they have integrated conflicting parts of the self. The demon to angel transformation that happens in conversion narratives is the same as the shadow integration that happens in successful therapy. Contemporary self-help culture has thoroughly absorbed demon language. Books promise to help you conquer your demons, silence your inner critic, overcome the voices that hold you back. These aren't religious books, they are pop psychology, but the vocabulary is ancient. The demons are fear, shame, perfectionism, negative self-talk, all the internal forces that sabotage well-being. The persistence of demon language suggests something important. After centuries of scientific and medical progress, we still need ways to talk about the experience of internal struggle that honor its felt reality. Clinical language, symptoms, disorders, dysfunctions describes from outside. Demon language describes from inside, from the subjective experience of being at war with yourself. Perhaps demons were always this, powerful metaphors for internal and external forces that threaten human flourishing. Whether they have independent existence is a different question from whether they name something real about human experience. The question isn't, do demons exist? But, what are we talking about when we talk about demons? And the answer includes suffering, compulsion, temptation, evil that feels larger than individual choice, the struggle for psychic freedom. In this sense, everyone has demons, and everyone needs some form of exorcism, whether they call it therapy, spiritual practice, recovery, or simply growing up. The work of becoming fully human involves confronting the demons, whatever we mean by that word, and either expelling them, integrating them, or learning to live at peace with them. The ancient wisdom, whether psychological or spiritual, recognizes that this work is necessary, difficult, and never entirely finished. Contemporary demons are remarkably standardized. Across films, television, video, anime, and comics, and visual and narrative conventions dominate. Demons have horns, often goat-like. They have wings, usually bat wings. They're associated with fire and brimstone. They have red or black skin. They speak in growling, layered voices. They smell of sulfur. They hate sacred objects, especially crosses. They possess people, causing contortions and supernatural strength. This standardization is historically recent. Medieval and Renaissance art showed enormous variety in demon depiction. Some demons were beautiful fallen angels. Others were grotesque hybrids of human and animal parts. Some were invisible, others took animal forms. The diversity reflected centuries of accumulated tradition from multiple sources. Modern media has narrowed this diversity into a recognizable type. The standardization began with 19th century illustrations, continued through early horror cinema, and solidified with films like The Exorcist and The Omen in the 1970s. Now, a demon in a Hollywood film looks basically the same as a demon in a Japanese anime or a Korean horror film. Globalized media has created a global demon. The implications are significant. People worldwide now share a common visual vocabulary for evil. A child in Brazil, Indonesia, and Iceland will recognize the same images as demonic. This is unprecedented. Throughout history, demons were culturally specific. Lamashtu didn't look like a Buddha. which didn't look like an oni. Now, media has imposed standardization. The horror film industry is worth billions globally. Horror films are cheap to produce relative to other genres and can return massive profits. The Paranormal Activity franchise, for example, has generated over $890 million in revenue from films that cost a few million combined to make. Demons are profitable. This economic reality drives cultural production. The Conjuring universe has grossed over $2 billion across 8 films. Each follows a formula: period setting, innocent family, creeping dread, discovery of demonic presence, climactic exorcism. The demons vary: possessed dolls, witch ghosts, demon nuns, but the underlying structure is Catholic demonology. Demons are fallen angels. They possess people and objects. They can only be defeated through faith and priestly authority. These films present as based on true stories, though investigation usually reveals thin evidentiary basis. The Warrens, whose cases inspire the films, were controversial even among believers. Many of their investigations have been debunked, but the based on true story frame is essential to the film's effectiveness. They're selling the possibility that demons are real, and reality claims enhance fear. Video games have embraced demons enthusiastically. The Doom franchise has players fighting through hell shooting demons. The Diablo series is set in a world where demonic forces threaten humanity. Persona and Shin Megami Tensei games let players summon and battle demons drawn from global mythologies. Bayonetta features a witch who battles angels and demons. The visual design in these games draws heavily on medieval Christian iconography mixed with contemporary dark fantasy aesthetics. What's interesting is how gameplay mechanizes demons. They become enemies with specific stats, weaknesses, and attack patterns. You learn demon types, develop strategies against them, optimize your demon fighting builds. This gamification transforms demons from terrifying spiritual enemies to puzzle elements. There are obstacles to be overcome through skill and knowledge. Anime and manga, particularly Japanese productions, show interesting hybridity. Series like Demon Slayer and Chainsaw Man use Western demon aesthetics, but combine them with Japanese yokai traditions and contemporary urban fantasy. The demons are simultaneously familiar and strange, recognizable as demons to global audiences, but with distinctly Japanese narrative and visual elements. Death Note features a Shinigami, death god, who appears to a human and grants him demonic power. The Shinigami looks like a Western demon, skeletal, winged, monstrous, but operates according to rules that blend Japanese death folklore with Christian concepts of selling one's soul. This hybrid form is common in Japanese demon media, creating something neither purely Western nor purely Japanese but globally recognizable. American television has produced numerous demon-focused series. Buffy the Vampire Slayer and its spin-off Angel featured demons extensively, creating elaborate mythologies. Supernatural ran for 15 seasons, largely focused on hunting demons. Lucifer reimagined the devil as a nightclub owner in Los Angeles. These shows introduced demon lore to millions of viewers, teaching them how to recognize possession, what demon hierarchies look like, how exorcism works. The series Evil presents an interesting contemporary case. It follows a skeptical psychologist, a priest in training, and a technology expert who investigates supposed miracles and possessions for the Catholic Church. Each episode balances psychological and supernatural explanations. The show doesn't definitively answer whether demons are real or whether everything can be explained naturally. This ambiguity reflects contemporary audiences' divided state. Many are skeptical but still find the possibility compelling. Comic books have featured demons since early days. Hellboy, created by Mike Mignola, is himself a demon summoned to Earth as an infant, raised by humans, and now fights for good. The series plays with the idea that demonic nature isn't destiny, that choice matters more than origin. Ghost Rider features a man bonded with a demon, becoming a supernatural agent of vengeance. These comics complicate simple good versus evil narratives while maintaining demons as real entities. The economic model of modern demon content is worth noting. Studios invest in demon franchises because they're reliable. Horror audiences are loyal. Production costs are manageable. International markets are receptive. Streaming platforms need content and demon stories provide it. Netflix, Amazon, Hulu and Disney Plus all feature demon-themed content. The demand seems inexhaustible, but there's also serious artistic engagement with demons. The films of Robert Eggers, particularly The Witch, use demon belief to explore psychological and social themes. The Witch is set in 1630s New England and portrays Puritan demonological belief without comment. The family believes they're being attacked by a witch working with the devil. The film never confirms whether this is true or whether the family is destroying itself through paranoid accusation. The ambiguity makes it more disturbing than films where demons are obviously real. Ari Aster's Hereditary uses demonic possession as a framework for family trauma. The demon Paimon serves as both literal supernatural threat and metaphor for inherited dysfunction. The film works on both levels, as a story about actual demonic conspiracy and as a story about how families transmit pain across generations. The standardization of demons creates odd juxtapositions. A Pentecostal pastor in Uganda performing deliverance ministry might have his understanding of demons shaped by The Exorcist and conjuring films he's watched. Traditional healers in South America incorporate Catholic demon elements they've absorbed from media. The boundaries between authentic tradition and media representation blur. Religious educators worry about this. Young Catholics learn about demons from movies before they learn church teaching. The cinematic demons, always dramatic, always defeatable through the right ritual, create expectations that don't match church doctrine. Priests complain that people expect exorcism to work like in the movies instantly and dramatically, but perhaps the most significant impact is on non-believers. Millions of secular people who don't believe in demons still consume demon content voraciously. What does it mean that atheists watch demon movies? Perhaps it's safe fear, experiencing the thrill of the demonic without actual belief. Or perhaps it's vicarious engagement with the possibility, a way of keeping the door cracked to the supernatural without committing. The global demon is a peculiar entity, simultaneously ancient and modern, believed and disbelieved everywhere and nowhere. It's a product of media capitalism, but it draws on millennia of human fear and fascination. It represents evil in recognizable form, but that form is increasingly divorced from specific religious traditions. It's a shared nightmare, a common enemy, a universal shadow, and it generates billions of dollars annually, while millions of people experience real suffering attributed to demons. The tension between demons as entertainment and demons as spiritual reality creates ethical complexity. Is it appropriate to profit from portraying what many believe is ultimate evil? Is demon content desensitizing people to spiritual realities or simply providing harmless thrills? These questions don't have clear answers, but they're worth asking as we consume yet another demon film, play another demon game, and watch another demon anime. 5,000 years, from Sumerian clay tablets to Netflix series, from Pazuzu amulets to exorcist franchises, demons have persisted. The names changed, the forms shifted, but the core idea remained. Something invisible wants to hurt us, and we must protect ourselves. Why? What makes this particular idea so durable? Humans have abandoned countless beliefs. We no longer think disease is caused by bad air or that the sun revolves around the earth, but demons in some form remain in billions of minds. Even people who don't believe in literal demons use demon language. Even secular cultures produce demon content. What work is this idea doing? First, demons explain suffering. When terrible things happen, especially to innocent people, humans demand explanation. Random chance is unbearable. Why me? Requires an answer. Demons provide that answer. You're suffering because invisible forces are attacking you. It's not meaningless. It's warfare. This explanation offers something clinical language often doesn't: agency. If you're depressed because of neurotransmitter imbalances, you're passive, a biological machine malfunctioning. But if you're depressed because demons are attacking you, you can fight back. Prayer, ritual, spiritual practice become weapons. You're not helpless, you're a warrior. The historian of religion Elaine Pagels, in The Origin of Satan, argues that demons serve social functions. They define boundaries. Declaring someone demonic places them absolutely outside the community. There's no compromise with demons. This makes the demon concept useful for creating cohesion. The group bonds against a common enemy. It's also dangerous. It enables dehumanization. If your opponents are demonic, anything you do to them becomes justified. Medieval witch hunts demonstrate this dark utility. When communities fractured under pressure, witch accusations surged. Accusing the outsider, the different, the strange of demonic connection restored cohesion through scapegoating. The executed witches carried away communal anxiety. Their deaths purified the community, at least temporarily, at horrific cost. But demons also serve psychological functions. Carl Jung argued that demons represent the shadow, rejected parts of the self projected outward. What we cannot accept in ourselves, we make into demons outside ourselves. The rage we deny becomes a demon of wrath. The desire we repress becomes a demon of lust. Exorcising demons becomes a way of doing psychological work without direct confrontation with the self. Anthropologist T.M. Lerman, who studies religious experience, suggests demons make abstract moral struggles concrete. Resist. Temptation is vague advice. There's a demon whispering in your ear. Identify its voice, rebuke it, is concrete and actionable. Demons give form to formless struggles. They make spiritual warfare tangible. The gender dimension cannot be ignored. Demon discourse has historically been used to control women. Women are more susceptible to demons, medieval theologians claimed. Women's bodies are more permeable, more emotional, less rational. This framing justified male control over female sexuality, autonomy, and spirituality. Most accused witches were women. Most possession cases involved women. But possession also gave women power they otherwise lacked. The possessed nun could speak truths forbidden to her normal self. The demon speaking through her could condemn priests, make accusations, express rage. Possession was simultaneously oppression and liberation, a weapon used against women and a weapon women could use. Looking across cultures, the possession pattern appears overwhelmingly in communities where people, especially women, lack other forms of power or voice. When social structures don't allow direct expression of suffering or resistance, possession provides indirect means. The possessed person can say and do things that would be punishable if done deliberately. The demon provides plausible deniability. Economic anxiety correlates with demon belief intensity. When economic systems collapse or transform rapidly, demon accusations surge. Witch trials peaked during periods of economic disruption. Contemporary deliverance ministry thrives in areas of economic desperation. Demons provide explanations for why promises aren't being fulfilled, why hard work doesn't lead to prosperity, why the system seems rigged. Political uses of demon language remain common. Opponents are demonized, literally portrayed as demonic. This rhetoric escalates conflict. You can negotiate with people. You must destroy demons. When politics becomes warfare between good and evil, demons are the natural vocabulary. The environmental historian Nancy Langston notes that demons often cluster at boundaries between civilization and wilderness. Desert demons, forest demons, mountain demons, these populate the margins. As humans expand, demons retreat but never quite disappear. They remain at the edges, in the unexplored places, in the dark. This suggests demons represent the unknown, the uncontrolled, the parts of reality we haven't mastered. Technology hasn't eliminated demons, it's relocated them. The internet now hosts demons, trolls, toxic influencers, algorithmic manipulation, addictive design. People describe social media addiction in demon language. I can't stop scrolling. It's like something possesses me. The algorithm knows me better than I know myself. Digital demons exploit psychological vulnerabilities just as traditional demons supposedly did. Climate anxiety has generated new demon language. The future is described as haunted, cursed, possessed by the sins of past generations. The carbon we've released is like a demon summoned that we cannot banish. This isn't literal demonology, but it uses the conceptual framework. Actions of unleashed forces we can't control that will torment future generations. Some philosophers argue demons represent genuine metaphysical realities, not beings, but principles. The demonic is radical negation, destruction for its own sake, evil as active force rather than mere absence of good. Whether personified or not, this negative principle exists in human experience. Torturers who enjoy causing pain, mass murderers who kill without reason, systems that destroy human dignity, these manifest something that demon language attempts to name. Others argue demons are strictly cultural constructions with no referent beyond human psychology and society. They're useful fictions that organize experience, but there's nothing they point to except human minds creating and projecting meaning. The question might be, does it matter? If demons function to explain suffering, provide agency, create meaning, structure moral struggle, and enable healing, if they do all this work regardless of ontological status, then perhaps the question of their literal existence is secondary to understanding what they reveal about human needs and fears. We are meaning-making creatures. We cannot tolerate meaninglessness. When reality overwhelms, when children die, when cruelty flourishes, when good people suffer and evil people prosper, we generate explanations. Demons are one such explanation, remarkably persistent because it works psychologically and socially, even if not metaphysically. The history of demons is ultimately the history of human attempts to make sense of evil. Why does evil exist? Why do I do things I don't want to do? Why does suffering seem personal, targeted, malicious? Demons answer these questions. The answers might not be true in any literal sense, but they're true to experience. They capture something about how evil feels, invasive, alien, overwhelming, purposeful. Looking back through 5 millennia, from the first cuneiform tablets about Lamashtu to the latest streaming series about possession, what emerges is not a story about invisible beings. It's a story about visible humans, how we've understood ourselves, our suffering, our moral struggles, our communities, our cosmos. The demons we created in turn created us, shaping our psychology, our institutions, our art, our nightmares. And they're not done. As long as humans suffer, we'll need ways to name that suffering. As long as we struggle with ourselves, we'll need language for internal warfare. As long as evil exists, we'll personify it, give it form, tell stories about battling it. The demons will persist because we need them to. They're mirrors, showing us our darkness, our fears, our capacity for projection, scapegoating and cruelty, but also our resilience, our courage, our will to fight for light against darkness, however. we understand those ancient categories. The last word belongs to a medieval monk copying a demon text in a cold scriptorium who wrote in the margin, "Whoever reads this, pray for me, a sinner who wrote it while demons troubled me." Across 1,000 years we understand exactly what he meant.